Lord of the Mysteries Fire of Destruction Chapter 341-350. Empress Barot, Sunday, August 19, 1349, 9:20 a.m. Sitting at one of the multiple picnic tables behind the mansion as it was still under repair after Thursday's earthquake, Backland's brightest gem, Audrey Hall, looked down at the newspaper in her hands. The blonde noblewoman's eyes lingered on the information in it for long moments, her expression unreadable. But if one were to look closely, one would notice how her eyebrow and eyelid twitched almost imperceptibly. "Are you all right, my dear?" Putting the paper down calmly, Audrey picked up the beautiful and highly detailed teacup on her plate and took a soft sip. "I'm fine, Mother. It's just, this news is certainly shocking." The lady of Hall House nodded slightly as she took a soft bite of her piece of carrot cake. "That's putting it mildly, dear. You'd think that with the price on his head and the forces of the realm looking for him, Adrian Kenway would keep a low profile and disappear off the map for a while, never to be seen again. Hide somewhere remote so he could save his life, that's what a sane person would do." Sigh. Lowering the plate with the cake, the matriarch extended a delicately gloved hand towards her daughter, who, understanding the message, held out the newspaper. After reading the headline, the elder Hall shook her head. But he was never a sane fellow. Every action he takes only proves and exalts his insanity. Audrey said nothing, just gave a weak nod at her mother's words, and after a few seconds, she put the paper down again. Unable to help herself, her crystalline emerald eyes were drawn to the huge headline written in black ink, which gave more impact to what it said. "The Scarlet Monarch and the Fool, the mysterious supporters of the White Dragon Knight of the East Borough. Around the only women of the Hall family and parked at the corners." A crowd of guards guarded the place where they were eating. Audrey glanced at them briefly before closing her eyes and taking another delicate sip of her tea, hoping the honey chamomile would help her relax. The tea didn't work. Her scream was barely muffled by her pillow that had not only been screamed at, but had also been thumped and shaken side to side in the last 5 minutes since Audrey had returned to her room. A room that, luckily for the spectator, had not suffered much damage from the earthquake. Only the windows had been broken and those had been quickly replaced. Lifting her head from the pillow and with her hair now somewhat disheveled, Audrey fell backwards, staring blankly at the ceiling of her room. Her classes for the week had been cancelled until the beginning of September, so she had a little holiday, something she couldn't even be happy about because of the sudden break's cause. A sudden heaviness in her stomach made her look down into worried eyes. Susie looked worriedly at her best friend, teacher, owner, with her ears down and tail lying on her legs. Her big brown eyes sparkled with emotions. "Hello, Susie," the noblewoman murmured in a soft voice as, with one hand, she began to gently stroke behind the golden retriever's left ear, her favorite spot. Susie's gaze didn't change, but her tail twitched for a moment before it began to wag back and forth gently, not as excitedly as she normally would. It was a gentle but sad movement, the swinging of a sad child whose legs only moved by inertia. Susie said nothing, nor did Audrey. They both just focused on each other's company. Audrey's hand continued its work automatically as her mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow is the Tarot Club. The pause that Mr. Fool dictated was over. Yesterday, the leader of the Tarot Club had communicated that the meetings would return to normal. She was sure she would be elated if it hadn't happened. She had been waiting for this moment since Mr. Fool had notified her that the mission to kill Kilongos was over after Chariot killed him. Sigh. The thought of the man only made her fear of tomorrow grow. How will Mr. Fool react? I know he's a fair and benevolent existence, but Mr. Chariot broke the rules. Don't mention his name to strangers and keep the existence of the Tarot Club a secret. Even for someone as calm and collected as Mr. Fool, this is inexcusable and deserves punishment. And Audrey feared as much. Will it be a reprimand, an expulsion, or an execution? Any of those possibilities could become a reality. But why would Mr. Chariot do this? The more she thought about it, the less sense it made to Audrey. Something so brazen and outlandish didn't fit in with this guy's personality at all. Mr. Chariot can be dishonest, manipulative, cheating, bullying, provocative, teasing, misguided, mischievous, spiteful, arrogant, disrespectful, blasphemous, insane. Audrey's train of thought, which was going so fast it was leaving a trail of smoke behind it, slowed to a stop at the, stop. Now that she thought about it and just highlighting those points, Mr. Chariot was a horrible person. Sure, That's his persona in meetings. I'm sure in his day-to-day life, he's a completely different one. She noticed this every time she went out partying to act as a spectator. Depending on the situation, each person acted differently. When introduced to a new group of people, people act differently than they would in a group of friends. This is not out of malice but as a form of protection that goes both ways. Everyone wears a different mask to hide who they are, and it is certain that Chariot's mask is just that. A mask. Someone who outside of meetings rescues kidnapped people and destroys evil gangs and saves the day can't be such a horrible person in reality. A hero cannot be a villain. Even Emperor Russell himself thinks so. She was getting off topic. Audrey abruptly sat up with that fleeting thought, causing Susie to roll to the side and give her an ugly look. Chariot's true personality aside, if there's one thing he never was, it's being disrespectful to Mr. Fool. So, doing this out of the blue doesn't make sense for someone like him. It's like he's a completely different person. Her brow furrowed slightly, her hand moved, and she quickly went back to scratching Susie's ear, who melted at the cuddling. Letting herself go as she felt her teacher's emotional state improve a little. Unless, this is a mutual agreement. Mr. Fool and Mr. Chariot came to an agreement that allowed the latter to reveal Mr. Fool's existence. Yes, that's it. Audrey felt that she had arrived at the truth. But just as she was at the peak of her elation, a fleeting thought struck her like a rifle bullet kills an Ava in mid-flight. But that doesn't explain who the Scarlet Monarch is and why he suddenly appears as an ally of Mr. Fool in the Tarot Club. Letting out a soft sigh, Audrey went into cogitation to calm her agitated emotions. Whatever the truth was, she would know tomorrow. Ads by PubFuture. Somewhere in the Sonia C. Blue Avenger. With a plaque, the navy blue-bound book closed, having documented a new route he had not yet explored. Alger Wilson tucked the book into his waistcoat along with the pencil he had used to jot it down. His blue hair blowing in the sea wind, his deep-set eyes staring at the storm on the horizon. With his experience at sea and the knowledge the potion brought him, Alger quickly gave the order to change course. With the order given, he returned to his room and closed the door. Sitting back in his seat, the man scratched his brow and looked seriously ahead. What is Mr. Fool planning? He had received a letter from the church stating that he should be aware of Adrian Kenway and that if he came across any information about the Scarlet Monarch and the Fool, he should contact them as soon as possible. It also came with a report of what had happened on Thursday the 16th. Alger had not heard anything about it as he had still been at sea when it all happened. As was his custom by now, as soon as he read the message Alger destroyed it. Putting a hand to his chin, the man struck a thoughtful pose as he scratched the beginnings of his beard. While the report contained a great deal of information, Alger was sure that much of it had been left out or withheld. I'm nobody important, so it's obvious they won't share all the information. The Blue Avenger captain thought somewhat bitterly and slightly annoyed. And it seems that Mr. Fool feels the same way. Whatever happened there, it is obvious that it was a secret mission that Mr. Fool entrusted Mr. Chariot with. The leader of the Tarot Club had already shown his enmity towards the evil gods, a sign of that would be his intervention in the ritual to the fallen creator in Tingen. It is not at all strange that he also intervened in what happened in Backland. For one, he used his blessed, while for the other, he used Chariot. Both could be considered huge events, and Alger sensed that something else had emerged with this latest interference. Mr. Fool has regained more strength and is now ready to show himself to the world. He never thought for a moment that Chariot had betrayed the Tarot Club, even though the man was clearly insane, he knew who had his hand on his neck. So Alger was absolutely certain, without a doubt, that the revelation of the existence of Mr. Fool and the implication of the Tarot Club's existence was all a plan of Mr. Fool's. But in spite of knowing that, there was something that confused Alger. Who was the Scarlet Monarch? Considering what was revealed, he is quite possibly an ally of Mr. Fool and the Tarot Club. And considering the honorific name that came with the message, he is a he as well. He didn't think about why Mr. Fool had never mentioned the existence of this ally or that he was also behind the Tarot Club, or rather Alger didn't dare think about why. Stay out of God's business. Alger thought serenely as he closed his eyes for a moment. The mantra by which he had survived so many years in this world repeated itself in his mind like a broken record. Doubly so if it was business between two gods. A little fear curled up in his stomach along with a great contentment, a small smile on his face. Joining the tarot club had proved to have been the right decision. With 2 great existences behind us, our growth is assured as long as we prove ourselves useful. 2 great existences never unite for no reason. The limit was the heavens for anyone who followed the path those existences planned to walk. That path was only reserved for the best of the best, the gold from the copper. Only the strongest and most capable were worthy of safety. Rising from his seat, the man marched decisively to the door of his room. Alger had a new objective, a new goal: to free himself from the oppression of the church. He had to be stronger if he wanted to prove himself worthy to follow the Fool and the Scarlet Monarch through all the hardships and difficulties that were sure to befall him. Mr. Fool only entrusted this job to Mr. Chariot because he is extremely capable, skilled, and strong, someone who has already proven that he is the one you contact to get the job done. With new determination in mind, Alger opened the door with a loud bang, the sound drawing a startled look from his men. Ignoring their stares, Alger walked to the front of the ship. Staring at the dark clouds in the distance, his determination did not waver but only strengthened. Change course, we're heading straight into the storm. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Empress Barot, Matched Mansion. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, Hazel lightly touched the saturated cut on her forehead. Her brow furrowed slightly as she felt the burning sting before returning to the curious calm of before. That'll leave a scar. Biting her lips slightly, the swindler thought with some bitterness as she lowered her bangs that once again hid the wound. A small sigh left her lips, and she shook her head, disappointed with herself. Luckily, it's easy to hide. A person appeared in her mind, a young woman with emerald eyes and golden hair whose ever-elegant and gentle expression was twisted into a sneering sneer as she looked at her. Hazel gritted her teeth hard, and her fists clenched in fury. She was sure that even if someone like her had suffered a scar, it would surely only make her more beautiful. Unlike her, it would only make her more disgusted. Grr! An annoyed grunt left her lips, but shaking her head, Hazel closed her eyes and went into cogitation. After a few seconds, her acid frown relaxed, and her hands were released. She stayed like that for a while longer, making sure her state was calm again. Judging that she was calmer, Hazel opened her eyes and saw her reflection again. Her brown eyes were sharp and focused, they took everything around her in great detail and easily found valuables. Her greenish-black hair fell calmly across her forehead, and the treatments and products she had used on it over the years ensured that it maintained a shiny, soft color. Her features were fine, and unlike the rest of the other noble ladies, she was sharper and stronger. This was a product of her nights out and serious training at the hands of her 2 Beander teachers. Something that filled her with pride. In matters of strength and combat, Hazel was sure she would beat them all. Even her. Shaking her head, the only daughter of the house Matched, lowered the silver mirror and placed it next to her notebook. Her eyes moved from the hand mirror and moved to the letter resting unsuspectingly on top of the notebook. A determined look flashed in her eyes. Knock knock. With nimble hands, she swiftly grabbed the letter and tucked it into a hidden pocket of her dress, a movement so smooth and swift that it seemed her hands never moved from the table. No sooner had she done so than the door to her room was opened by a familiar older woman who still retained her beauty and youthfulness, but beneath her eyes that looked like her daughter's were light black bags. She still had some patches from the cuts she had suffered but seemed to be recovering well. "Excuse me, daughter, I'm not disturbing anything, am I?" Rihanna Matched asked, her voice tired but her expression gentle. Smiling calmly at her mother, Hazel rose from her new desk and gave a graceful bow in her elegant green dress. "I was just going over a few things from my past classes, mother." At her reply, Rihanna's expression brightened noticeably and her smile became cheerful. "You've been putting a lot more effort into your studies these past few months. Your father and I are very proud of you." Closing the door behind her, the older woman let out a heavy sigh, so heavy that it startled Hazel, who looked at her mother in a daze. The younger woman had already started walking towards her mother when the next thing she said froze her in her tracks. "Your father wants to talk to you." Oh, unconsciously, Hazel swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Whenever her father wanted to talk to her, it was always a bad sign. Walking close but still a few steps behind the mistress of the house, Hazel's gaze strayed for a moment to the repairs still being carried out after the earthquake. It wasn't long before they reached a fine wooden door, which her mother knocked on. After hearing a "come in," they both entered. Her father's office was still as glorious and strong as ever. The bookshelves that had been passed down from generation to generation since this mansion was built stood strong. The great multitude of books that filled it gave it more of a library feel than a study. All the books dealt with different subjects: economics, mathematics, geometry, politics, history, etc. Sitting at a large dark oak desk and wearing reading glasses over his long face was the father of the house and member of the new party, Maury Matched, who looked at his wife and daughter with a small smile. Dark bags under his eyes from too little sleep. "Thank you for bringing her, my dear." His wife gave a weak nod with a small smile. Looking down at her daughter beside her, Rihanna kissed her hair softly to the embarrassment of the younger one, who earned a giggle from both adults. "I'll leave you two alone for a moment." Watching as the door closed, Hazel returned her attention to her father, who watched her with a small smile. Raising his arm, the man pointed to the chair in front of his desk. Ads by PubFuture. "Sit down for a moment, my daughter, I want to talk to you about something." Grasping the edges of her dress, Hazel gave a graceful curtsy. "As you wish, father." Sitting down in the soft, cushioned chair, Hazel's brown eyes looked calm, but her mind was alert and serious. She did not understand why her father would summon her so suddenly and without warning. Something must have happened. "I'm sure it's related to what happened in East Borough." Her father began to speak as soon as she was seated. "Dear, I am happy to tell you that Miss Annabeth is recovering well. She is steadily showing signs of improvement, and it shouldn't be long before she wakes up." "That's great to hear, father." Hazel murmured, somewhat surprised. She had thought the wound her maid had suffered to the head had been more serious and might even show mental damage. She tapped her finger on her chest 4 times, "Praise the goddess for that." Her father repeated the gesture with a believing expression, "Praise the goddess." After a few seconds of silence out of respect, Maury continued, "It's obvious your mother wouldn't go looking for you just for that. I have a few things to tell you, actually." "Ah, there it is," Hazel thought, relaxing her body. It was time to see what this was all about. She watched curiously as her father opened one of the multiple drawers from his side of the desk and placed it on top of the table. It took only an instant for the eyes of the only daughter in the house to recognize the object on the silver tray. It was a torn piece of a garment covered in dried blood, giving it a dark brown color. "Can you explain to me how it is that you have knowledge of first aid when you never studied it?" Looking at her father with a calm gaze, Hazel gave a small smile and a slight nod. The quips she had practiced so much with her teacher quickly came out of her mouth with fine, expert mastery. "I'm trying to expand my knowledge, father, so I've been borrowing some of the books from the library. One of the medical books is where I learned about first aid." Pointing to the torn garment, she continued, "Unfortunately, or fortuitously, if you want to look at it that way, I've never had the chance to put it into practice. Thank the goddess that the injuries Annabeth suffered were among the things I studied." Her father only gave a serene nod. His brown eyes moved to one of the multiple books on the shelf behind him. "If so, then I doubt it would be difficult for you to tell me which book and author you were reading." "Basic Principles of Medicine, by Dr. Anthony House, 1310, Hazel replied with the corners of her lips lifting a little higher. The man's eyebrows rose slightly before a small chuckle came from him. "It seems my daughter is a genius to take such an advanced doctor's book and be able to understand it." The smile on her face turned slightly arrogant, and Hazel snorted confidently. "Why are you surprised, father? I am your daughter, flesh and blood. It's obvious that if something catches my eye, I will take all the information I can about it and make it my own." Giving a nod that in no way hid the pride that flowed out of him, Maury Matched set the tray aside with the garment and put it away again. "You don't know how happy I am to hear that, daughter. That alone makes the decision your mother and I made the right one." Her brow had been relaxed, furrowed slightly, ignoring the stinging the wound on her forehead gave him. Hazel looked doubtfully at her father. Smiling calmly at his daughter, Maury sighed. "Hazel, what happened in East Borough was a huge disaster of proportions never before seen in this city. You should know that the real consequences are yet to come." While in the eyes of the rest of Backland, East Borough was only a stain and rot that littered the capital of capitals. The truth is that Backland is what it is, thanks to the blood and tears of East Borough. The number of cheap laborers that part alone produced filled more than half the factories in the city. Not to mention that the same area was where most of the more toxic factories were located. This was done not only because of the cheapness of the land but also to avoid staining the cleaner parts of the city. Once things settle down, we can really see the damage caused by the moonless night. It is very likely that we will be on the brink of a crisis if we don't get our cards together. All the great houses and nobles are already moving to minimize the damage as much as possible, but no matter how much we look at it, the losses will still be enormous. And I assume we are not excluded from those losses, are we? Hazel looked at her father seriously. She already knew what the man was talking about. The teacher had already mentioned this multiple times in his letter. The main reason why the Indiana Jones plan had been created was also very much in mind. Mori looked at his daughter for any further reaction, and seeing that she was only looking at him seriously, he nodded. Yes, my dear, that's why your mother and I haven't been able to join in on the last few meals. We keep doing checks so we don't fall out of our place. Luckily, most of our income didn't depend on East Borough, so we didn't suffer as much as other houses do now. Father, everything you tell me sounds stressful and extremely worrying, but you still don't explain why you called me. Hazel spoke somewhat wearily, her brow furrowed again, and her eyes glittered in distrust. Ads by PubFuture. If you say anything to me about an arranged marriage, you can forget about calling yourself my father. You'll never see me again in your life. At least the real me. On the brink of a crisis, an arranged marriage was a way to save two families from bankruptcy. Something that was repeated throughout history, and Hazel refused to be another of the many names on that list. I refused to marry someone weak. Only someone strong is worthy of me. At his daughter's bluntness, Mori couldn't help but look somewhat stunned at her before breaking into laughter. I've been so wrapped up in my work that I didn't even realize how much you've matured. Father. The daughter narrowed her eyes even more. Ha ha ha, sorry dear, you just caught me by surprise, is all. Shaking his head, Mori looked gently at his only daughter. Your mother and I, seeing the latest happenings in the world, have seen fit to begin to give more strength to your studies, she said. We won't be with you all your life, no matter how much we want to be. So the least we can do is to give you the best tools so that when you're on your own, you can move on without depending on anyone. What? Taken by surprise, Hazel mumbled, somewhat confused. This was not something she had expected. In a month, on the 18th of September, the entrance exams for the University of Wisdom in Lindbergh will be taken. There is no better place that can prepare you for the change that is coming than that. At the mention of Lindbergh, Hazel's eyebrows rose to her scalp, and she looked up in amazement at her father, who gave her a small smile. Your teachers are coming tomorrow for your first classes. Make the most of it and get some rest, Hazel. They're pretty tough. Watching as his daughter left his office, Mori opened another drawer and pulled out a long, aberrant bottle of whiskey. Placing a glass on the table, the man poured himself a drink and downed it in one gulp. The burning in his throat calmed him, and he breathed relief. His eyes cooled, and he looked back into his drawer where a revolver rested. Placing the bottle back in its hiding place and closing it, the veteran continued his work. He recognized the signs. A war is about to fall upon us. And they would protect their daughter no matter what. After telling one of the maids that she didn't want anyone to disturb her and locking the door to her room, Hazel walked quickly to her huge wardrobe. Giving 2 soft knocks and 1 loud one, she waited a few seconds before opening the door. What greeted her were the dozens of dresses and outfits she had to her name and a person. This person was a woman with greenish-black hair and bright brown eyes. She was wearing the same clothes and had the same face. Next to her was a black bag along with a change of clothes, the hunting clothes she always wore to the team's training sessions. Standing opposite each other, anyone would think they were twins. The only difference would be that this new, Hazel, brown eyes had a bigger and somewhat fiery gleam in them. Miss, is it time for the change? She asked as she held up the bag, the hunting clothes, and a small face mask. I don't think that's necessary, Chilindrina. Shaking her head slightly, Hazel gave a small, shaky smile at the curious look on her copy's face. I will contact teacher. He will want to hear this. That's fortunate. Lowering the letter in his hands, Adrian cupped his chin as his eyes closed slightly. His vision blurred for a moment before sharpening. Tap tap tap. His finger began to quietly tap his chin, a calm and gentle rhythm but with a hidden edge, a blade up his sleeve. The University of Wisdom. Hazel will be trying to get into that university in a month. His brow furrowed slightly as his tongue clicked in annoyance. Not only will the Indiana Jones plan not be necessary, but I won't have to worry about them finding out that the Hazel, who stayed in Backland and participated in tea parties, dances, and meetings was actually one of my soldiers. Tap 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 tap, how fortunate indeed. His eyes glittered dangerously as he gazed into the nothingness beyond as if he were looking at someone who wasn't there. The corners of his lips turned up in a smirk as he closed one eye. A mischievous wink at nothingness. Tell me, paranoid, was this one of your hands, or was it simple luck? Tap tap tap. Adrian tapped his chin a few more times before softly chuckling. If it's really one of his hands, I should say that his moves are definitely bold and daring. It's obvious he's doing it on purpose. He wants me to see them. Was it likely? Maybe it wasn't. Was it a possibility? Oh, no doubt. I know the rapper knows well enough about my existence, and I don't have to be a genius to know that the paranoid must know about it too. The rapper has already shown early on his knowledge of me. Finally, he revealed himself in the fiasco of a few days ago by handing me the card of blasphemy. I doubt the paranoid is as upfront as his twin, he's more detailed in that area. Little things here and there, in plain sight and easily overlooked if you're not paying attention. That's his way of playing poker. Adrian was sure it was only a matter of time before the two met. And from the looks of things, the time was approaching rather quickly, much more than he was comfortable with. Unlike the rapper, who is pure humanity, the paranoid is pure divinity. He is not driven by emotions or anything like that. Everything he does is for a reason and to gain as much advantage as possible. I'll take it as a given that all the gods know I'm an alien. But just because they know I'm an alien doesn't mean they know I'm a transmigrator or that I came down from the city of calamity. A soft, gentle chuckle escaped his lips. Sure, how could I forget my major aces? While everyone knows about the former, I'm sure hardly anyone knows about the latter. Maybe the only ones who know about it are K&D, the rapper, and the paranoid, but who am I kidding? I'm not that lucky, the number is surely higher. The redhead was sure that the twins knew that he had the City of Calamities and was another, transmigrator, like them. If not, why else would they be so willing to invest in him? Haha, invest, the more correct thing to call it would be to get me fat. The three-flavor soup had, at one point, been one of their most loyal allies. It wouldn't be crazy to think that they are preparing a welcome cake with him as the cherry. Most likely, they want to fill me up with juices and spices, slow cook me tenderly so that when I am thrown into the three-flavor soup, it can more easily regain its strength. He was now just a steak, an extremely juicy one, rich in fat and flavor, an ingredient of such quality that it would assure the soup of its place on the podium. Foo, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be another ingredient. A dark laugh came from deep within his fragmented soul, his eyes glowing at the lamps and the air turning hot. He planned to eat that soup, take every last drop, and make it his own. The ingredient would become the customer who would eat the main course. And after that soup will come the ribs. Licking his lips, his smile sharpened. Sure, that would be in case he never finds out that the one who betrayed him and caused his death was none other than his much-loved lord. I wonder how loud he would scream upon discovering that. Would he cry, demand a reason? Or would he just turn his back? What will be, what will be? Sighing, Adrian shook his head as he lightly bit his oatmeal biscuit. His gaze lost its darkness but kept its edge. I am still too weak to think of such things, only when I become a will I be able to put weight to my words, which are now nothing more than the cries of a bird that has just hatched. Leaving that aside, it seems my idea worked. Judging by the feedback from my potion, many hidden existences bought into the trick. Of course, that's for the lower ones who were the ones it was mostly aimed at. Ads by PubFuture. The great existences would easily see through his little trick and know what he wanted to do. And that was exactly what he wanted. Let them see everything. Let them see and think that he is showing it all. Let their arrogance be their blindfold. They think they know it all but fail to see the big screen. Always when they think they know it all is when they are the blindest. Adrian laughed darkly in his mind. He learned it from experience, after all. And what will make them more sure of that is my new honorific name. Single quote. With that kind of name, if any had any doubt as to whether or not I was an alien, it was settled by it. But of course, there's the real conspiracy. A trick hidden in another trick hidden in another trick. For those in the know, that three-line name only confirmed what it was. And cemented that very thing. Depending on the level of information each existence had, the conclusions would be considerably different but would remain essentially the same. Adrian knew that he could easily have placed his connection to the City of Calamities in his honorific name as Klein had done. But why did it? If I did that, the price on my head would not only have been greater than those of the Sea Kings but also the intensity with which other organizations and churches seek me out. It was more than certain that he would have an army of angels following at his heels. It is better to hide the truth in the truth that acts as a lie. That way, I'll be able to keep this hidden until I'm stronger. Sigh. Shaking his head, Adrian lowered his now empty coffee cup and looked around him. Around him was his current team, which already had a decent number. Sitting at the same table as him was pugilist Sasha, melee scholar Charlotte, planter Opera, half-spectator Jerry, and the still normal Serena who had a tired expression on her face. Do I have to eat all of this, Miss Opera? My stomach is full. Serena still couldn't believe she could say the last thing, but the woman couldn't think much about it because of Planter's burning gaze. I'm sorry, miss, but no. Your weight is way below average, and you must put on weight if you plan to stay here. These meals I prepare for you will do exactly that. They are high in calories and nutrients. Letting out a tired sigh, Serena gave a weak nod, spooned the soup into her mouth, and continued eating. Jerry was asleep with her head in Sasha's lap, who was calmly stroking her brown hair. The redhead's eyes then moved to another table, where Arbiter Zio and Trickmaster Furs were seated. Both were rereading for who knows how long the sheet of paper he left them with the formulas. Turning from the couple's table, he looked at the table where Zombie Marich and Wraith Sharon were sitting. Both were silent and calmly sipping their own cups of tea. Ads by PubFuture. His eyes moved back to Serena, Opera, and the sleeping Jerry. His gaze was calm, but his mind was something else. Serena Williams, while she has some determination and a desire to improve herself, is illiterate, she can't count and can barely read. Not only that, she is sick, and her body will take time for her to recover. Under Opera's care, treatments normally take years of physiotherapy and intense dieting would be reduced to a few days or weeks at most. Her body won't take long to recover and have the strength and weight of a normal woman. The problem will be the mind. As far as I understand, there are only 5 paths that increase the brain in terms of intelligence in low sequences. Those are Apprentice, Machine, Savant, Mystery Prior, and Reader. I have the formula for 3 but not the other 2. It wouldn't hurt to have 2 apprentices, but those would be 2 blood moons I have to worry about. Having 2 travelers would be quite useful and prove to be a very good investment. However, the sheer difficulty of obtaining the materials would make that difficult. Furs was lucky because she would have the support of an angel family from that path. This time Adrian didn't know if it would also happen, so it was better to avoid future problems. Mystery Prior is out of the question. Serena does not yet have the mental fortitudes to resist the direct injection of knowledge and will die as soon as she hears the first whispers. While he could protect her from those whispers, he doubted he'd be able to stay vigilant all day long enough to keep her from dying from it. If he got caught again like the Rose School did before, then she would be as good as dead if the whispering had started. Unlike the rest, Machine is sequence 8. Serena would have to go through Monster if I want her to get the brain from a machine. That makes me have to get 2 formulas in a set of materials. Not only do I have to worry about her digesting the potion in time, but the Monster path is for lucky people and Serena doesn't have much of that. I could even say her whole life is a misfortune. If I make Serena take that potion, it would only doom her to stay in a low sequence her whole life. Reader, I may get it in Lindbergh or even from Teacher, and I'm sure it can help, but while that path has great potential, Serena's lack of education will make bringing out that potential almost impossible. Even if the potion increases her intelligence, it cannot create miracles. Sure, he could always give her a potion that would increase her strength, but without a brain, that great strength meant nothing. That only leaves the last option. If I do it wrong, it will be a much more dangerous method than Mystery Prior, but if I do it right, it will be many times safer. Secret Supplicant has similarities to Mystery Prior in that they both receive information through great existences whispering things to them. The main difference would be that in Secret Suppliant, you can choose who whispers to you. If Serena kept continuously praying to the Scarlet Monarch, Adrian could get information to her safely and quickly without fear of hurting her and endangering her life. Plus, I have the entire sequence of that path resting in my wardrobe. Having a shepherd on my side would certainly be an advantage I can't ignore. He took all that into account before he took Serena. He didn't take her under his wing out of the goodness of his heart. While he wasn't evil, he wasn't a guardian angel either. When she knelt down and begged me to take her, I could see it. The fanaticism, the way she sees me. I am her idol, she said so herself. The modern man inside him saw the enormous advantage this could bring. He had seen how far these kinds of people could go. Defending the indefensible and always protecting their idols. What more loyal form is there than a crazed fan? Serena becoming a secret supplicant would just be the icing on the cake. The same was true of Opera and Jerry. To him, they made no difference in that sense. He was their idol, and he would use that to his advantage. Of course, because of his distrust of what the pathway she was on meant. Adrian would have an extra eye on Opera for anything. Sorry, girls, but I'm not a savior. I never was, Adrian thought calmly as he ate the food prepared by the planter. But don't worry, I promise that just as I will use you, I will raise you so high that you too will become idols to those who look up to you. Smiling, Adrian closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them mischievously. After all, I'm just a bastard. Not a piece of shit. Lowering his glasses and scratching his eyes to remove any dirt that might be there, Isengard put them back on and reread the letter. His expression broke into one of disbelief, and he lowered the letter in astonishment. How? The detective muttered, not believing what he was reading at all. The prospect of it being true was so ridiculous that he refused to accept it. After reading the paper and after a short chat with his student confirming that it was true, Isengard was close to handing his student over to the churches of the Evernight gods. The only thing that stopped him was that he was still waiting for a response from the Church of the God of Wisdom and Knowledge, just as he knew the redhead's personality. But still, his eyes moved to the packet beside his forgotten pipe, whose tobacco had already gone out from going so long without being inhaled. The detective's brow furrowed for a few moments before a heavy sigh left him. The older man lowered the letter, grabbed his pipe, lit it with another match, and took a deep, soothing puff. Though its flavor had considerably reduced now that it had been extinguished and relit, Isengard still found it acceptable. Blowing out a small cloud of smoke and feeling his throat warm, the detective watched the smoke disperse before rising from his seat. Extinguishing and putting away the pipe, Isengard grabbed the packet and the letter and left his office at a calm pace. Moving down the hallway of his cozy house, the man opened a door and descended into the basement, which had looked much more lived in since yesterday. A long group of 9 people was the first thing he saw as he descended the stairs. His eyes moved over the unfamiliar faces before stopping on the familiar faces of 2 women that only lasted a moment before his attention was taken by his student, who walked up to him with a mischievous little smile on his face. By the look on your face, teacher. Looks like I was right, no? The detective looked deeply at his student. His eyes took in every detail of his face and body and compared it to the last time he saw him all those days ago. To his surprise, he found small differences that caused him to stare at the man in bewilderment. Thanks to his years as a detective and being a true detective, his mind quickly found the reason, and he couldn't help but stare at his student in astonishment. Adrian, did you advance again? The red-haired man's eyebrows raised for a moment before he relaxed and let out a small chuckle. Wow, I didn't expect you to notice. It's so obvious. Listening to their conversation as neither of them tried to hide it. The largest person in the room stood up with a start and pointed at the redhead with awe and admiration in her tone. Wait, Captain, you advanced. You're sequence 6 now. Sasha, no need to shout. It's no big deal. As his student and the huge woman spoke, Isengard continued to stare dumbfounded at the young man in front of him. When I met him in June, he had just become sequence 9. But now he's sequence 6. Advance 3 sequences in 2 months. That speed of digestion made no sense. Not even the most skilled in the church achieved such a feat. Only those blessed by the gods could have even dreamed of such a feat. At such a thought, Isengard was barely able to control his face from breaking into shock. Controlling his breathing to calm himself, the man regretted leaving his pipe in his office. If that's why, then there shouldn't be a problem. Nodding inwardly in satisfaction, the detective looked at his pupil with a proud smile as he held out the packet. Here you have everything you need for the ritual of movement. The church designed and perfected a method for the safe removal of members in dangerous situations. But I advise you to be careful. It is a delicate ritual and everything has to be perfect or it can lead to unpleasant consequences. The instructions are inside, and there is enough for a one-way trip. I will help you prepare the initial steps. Listening to his teacher's explanation, Adrian gave him a small smile and a slight nod. Don't worry, teacher. I have someone who will make sure our journey is as safe and trouble-free as possible. Turning around, the red-headed man handed the package to a very excited Charlotte, who quickly left and started preparing everything. Looking at the expertly drawn circle and the various seals that contained the matrix, Isengard couldn't help but be amazed. A mystery prior, when, a sudden possibility flashed in his mind, and he looked at the rest of the people in the room. Were they all Beyonders? Watching his student and seeing his knowing smile, the detective sighed and shook his head. Why do you always run into so many Beyonders? You are like a magnet for them. Adrian rolled his shoulders. What do you want me to say, teacher? They're always after me. Ha, it's like that. Letting out a tired laugh, the older man shook his head and looked at his student deeply. Once you cross to the other side, someone will greet you. Try to be respectful. It's someone important. I'm sorry, old man, but if there is one thing the princess is not, it is respectful. Flora commented, already surrendered to the red-haired man's horrible habit. Not even the angels were safe from him. And I wear it with pride. Giving a small, innocent smile to the detective, Adrian patted the man's shoulder with amusement. Come on, when have I not been respectful? I'll be fine, the redhead said, ignoring the look everyone gave him at his words. Zio glared at him while Furs tried to look away after a few moments. Marich and Sharon were only a short glance. His team looked at him nervously. Seeing the look his student was getting, Isengard didn't know what to say. I'm too old for this. Deciding that ignoring him would be best for his mental health, the detective didn't mention anything. Sigh, patting Adrian's shoulder again, the shoulder looked with some concern at the young man. I'll assume you have money for your stay in Lindbergh. Money is the last thing I lack, teacher. I'll be fine in that area. Nodding slightly at his words, the older man sighed. Last thing, whatever you do, try to keep a low profile this time, yeah. The hospitality the church was giving him was already insane. In any other case he would have been abandoned. It was better that he did not try his luck. At his teacher's words, Adrian's smile turned sickly sweet. An overdose of the kind of candy that, due to the amount of sugar in it, turned into a strong poison. Of course, teacher, I'll keep my head down and not draw attention to myself. Quote. There was something wrong with this kid. There was no doubt about that. Shaking his head, he pulled his hand away from the red-haired man's shoulder and gave a weak smile. Take care of yourself, Adrian. I hope Lindbergh is to your liking. I also hope that someday we can meet again. Isengard knew this when he received the letter. This was surely the last time he would see the redhead for a long time. He was confident that the redhead would survive. He also had expectations that he hoped he would live up to. The smile on his face softened, and Adrian extended his hand to the man. Thank you for putting up with my craziness for so long, teacher. I'm sure we'll meet again. I'll try to send a letter or two. Shaking his head, Isengard grabbed the red-haired man's hand, but the taller young man enveloped him in a tight hug before he could react. Take good care of yourself, yeah. If you need anything, I'll make time to help you, Adrian said calmly, and the somewhat dazed detective returned the hug as best he could. See right, Isengard muttered, somewhat embarrassed by the sudden physical contact, an embarrassment that only grew as he saw how most of those present were looking at him. Knowing when enough was enough, Adrian pulled away from the detective. A mischievous grin on the face of the young man who only laughed in amusement. Come on, teacher, is it so bad to ask for a hug? Quote. It's okay, Adrian, I just didn't expect it, the detective replied, regaining his composure. He looked at the red-haired man, who laughed again. Looking behind the man and seeing that the matrix was about to be completed, Isengard gave a slight nod. Just don't die, young one. Remember that Grievous still lives on through you. Ha, I promise nothing, Adrian laughed with a wink. Sighing contentedly, Charlotte rose from the ground with his eyes up. After checking for the 6th time that everything was in order, the melee scholar caught the attention of the rest. Boss, everything is ready, we can go now. Adrian turned to look as an impressed whistle sounded inside him. That's a ritual circle if I've ever seen one. Whoever created it no doubt knew what they were doing. I can barely make out any of those symbols. Adrian nodded inwardly in agreement with his Cormidy's words. Charlotte's circle easily accommodated everyone present and still had room to spare. Its entire surface was filled with intricate and mysterious symbols laden with mysticism, many of which Adrian had never seen before. At the edges of the circle were 9 candles, each at an equal distance from the others. Each lit in white color, filling the basement with the air of knowledge and wisdom, made stronger by the various oils and powders that Charlotte had poured. The powders shone like stars in the night sky in various parts of the circle. A teleportation circle, Clever. Getting out the conventional way would be almost impossible. This is the safest and most effective way. Satisfied with the method, Adrian nodded contentedly at the method created by the church he planned to leave. Seeing that everything was ready, the red-haired man looked at his team and ordered in a loud voice. Everyone into the circle, we're leaving Backland. What about? We'll meet her there. Adrian calmly cut Sasha off as they all entered the circle. Glancing at his teacher, the redhead winked in amusement as he patted Charlotte's shoulder with some force. If you'd be so kind. Ignoring the burning in his shoulder, Charlotte clasped his hands together, which still had some of the dust on them. He rubbed them together for a moment, his spirituality making both palms glow. He pulled them apart for a moment and brought them back together quickly, in a loud clap. Ancient Hermes came out of his mouth as the palms clapped together. Wisdom. The next instant, the whole circle glowed white. With the dazzling light gone, Isengard looked at where his student and team once stood and could only sigh. Turning around, he began to climb the stairs out of his basement. With each step he climbed, his mind moved to the contents of the letter and his student's promotion. If he had previously believed that the red-haired man could be promoted to a saint, now the detective had no doubt. It was only a matter of time before that happened. Now, some of him even thought he could go beyond a saint to an excellency. While he thought that would be nearly impossible, the contents of the letter made him unable to help but think so. Scarlet Monarch and the Fool. Pausing in the middle of the staircase, the man looked into the empty basement behind him. Perhaps it won't be long before the 7 Orthodox churches become the 9 Orthodox churches. Shaking his head, the detective finally exited the basement. The light dimmed until, finally, Adrian could see again. The setting was not the strangely warm basement. Now, they were standing on a white marble floor. His scarlet eyes moved calmly around. Huge white marble pillars, with fine details and symbols traced by them, surrounded the place where they stood, which appeared to be the basement of some cathedral that had been modified. The orange flame lamps illuminated the place with their warm glow trapped in their glass cages. They stood on a platform slightly raised off the ground. Beneath them was the same symbol that Charlotte had drawn, and Adrian noticed that it was on the reverse side of it. The scent of it and its coloration were a perfect mirror image of it. So this is point B. Putting that aside, Adrian turned his gaze away from the circle to look at the only other person besides them in the place. The person standing in front of them was a man. The man in front of them had a long, wrinkled face. Silver-rimmed circular glasses rested on his nose. Deep, knowing eyes looked at all of them through the lenses. He wore a long white robe with fine gray detailing and the symbol of the Church of the God of Wisdom and Knowledge engraved in the middle of it. The church's symbol was an open book with the omniscient eye reading its pages. "My name is Zelig Ritter," the older man said serenely, his voice gravelly and old, "and I welcome you to the Holy Temple of Knowledge." Adrian gave only a faint nod at the man's words and then smiled knowingly. "Thank you for having us, seeing as it is only you here. It seems the church was quite satisfied with my proposition, The man's old eyes looked at him unwaveringly. After a few seconds, a small smile grew on his face. "The rumors and reports did not lie. You certainly are quite a character, Mr. Kenway. Thank you for the praise. I try not to disappoint." Returning the smile, Adrian stepped down from the platform where they stood, followed closely by his team, whose more inexperienced members looked around nervously while the older ones kept their cool. Giving a slight nod, Zelig turned around and began to walk in the direction of the only exit from the basement. "We'll have a little chat before we introduce you to our city. If I may ask, Mr. Kenway, how many languages are you fluent in, and how would you consider your knowledge?" "Ah, there it is. I was wondering what took you so long to show it." A small smile formed on his face as he followed the man, as he easily detected the slight contempt in the tone. The discrimination against the low IQ. "If you're an idiot, you can forget about staying here." Honestly, he found it hugely ironic and hypocritical that a church that preaches knowledge as power would be so harsh in judging people who, in their eyes, are dumb or not sharp enough for their tastes. If you are not a genius, you can forget about rising through the ranks. And if you're stupid, they won't shake their hands at kicking you out. This is another reason why I don't want Serena to take the reader's potion. I'm sure to even give it to her, she'll have to go through some kind of exam, and they'll tear her apart. Sighing inwardly, the redhead nodded to Zelig and replied in perfect Elvish. I can speak Loan, Fasak, Ancient Fasak, Hermes, Ancient Hermes, Jotun, Dragonic, and Elvish. I consider my mystic knowledge to be quite good, and if you like, I have no problem demonstrating it. Every few words, Adrian switched between the languages he knew and demonstrated his mastery of them. The slight contempt in Zelig's eyes disappeared and was replaced by a warm welcome. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And don't worry about your mystical knowledge. Lord Isengard filled us in on that. Turning and looking at the man's face, he continued, Sequence 7 in less than 2 months, that's all. 6. Adrian interrupted with a small grin, and Zelig's pacing stopped for a moment. Excuse me, the red-haired man's grin only grew as he saw the older man's confused face. I am now Sequence 6 and have fully digested my potion. The man's eyebrows rose until they disappeared into the hood of his robe before dropping as quickly as they rose. The warmth in his gaze grew stronger and even a gentle smile graced his face. That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Kenway. I hope you don't mind if we confirm that later. Shaking his head, Adrian replied, Not at all. So, where were we going? Realizing they had been left standing in the middle of the hallway, Zelig resumed walking. I'm sorry, I was just surprised by your words. Now I see why we agreed to take you in despite what you did. A mind like that can't just wander off without leaving his contribution. Oh, you have no idea, Adrian laughed darkly as he followed the man. His team behind him looked confused, except for the older members. One thing that was stressed a lot in the original story was how the more capable you were, the better you would be treated in this church. That's why Adrian didn't shy away from revealing that he was now a fully digested Sequence 6. The more value I show them, the better the investment they will put in me. He knew that the only reason they could walk through the Holy Temple was his deal with the church. His priority now was to add more reasons to stay. Ads by PubFuture. The corridors of the Holy Temple of Knowledge were not unlike the basement from which they emerged. The same white marble covered the floor while the columns stood tall and proud, no longer covered in mysterious symbols. Unlike what the team expected, the corridors were empty. The only sounds in them were their footsteps. It is safest to keep our arrival a secret. After all, the church is hiding a criminal wanted by the whole world. It would look bad if it were discovered that you were here, Flora commented nonchalantly as she watched from her VIP seat, silently wishing she had popcorn. For obvious reasons, Adrian didn't comment on the matter. He just continued on his way behind Zelig, who, although he had lost his warmth, still kept that little smile from before. After a few long minutes of walking and climbing some spiral stairs, the group arrived at a large door with fine silver details. Zelig stepped forward and gave a few gentle knocks. Come in, a distinctly male voice answered behind the door, and with a nod, the older man opened it and moved to the side to allow them through. This is as far as I go. I hope we can talk another time, Mr. Adrian. I'm sure you have much to tell. Smiling calmly at the man, the red-haired man merely nodded and entered, followed by his team. As soon as Marich entered, Zelig closed the door, and Adrian could hear his footsteps recede into the distance until they disappeared. Leaving the old man aside, the red-haired man turned his attention to the person who stood with his back to them and was reading a book as if they weren't there. His shiny, hairless head glistened slightly in the light provided by the office's huge windows. His robes were similar to Zelig's but were much more detailed. Around his neck hung a necklace with the symbol of the church. The office was much larger than it appeared on the outside. The walls of the room were made up of huge bookshelves that were filled with books and more books. The smell of the place reminded the red-haired man of walking into his old university library to study for his exam. The man in robes calmly closed the book in his hands. He turned around, and his deep eyes finally fell on the group behind him. Welcome, Mr. Kenway. I hope the temple is to your liking. His voice was soft and wise, an old man with great years of experience behind him. A small shiver ran up the spines of those present. Serena and Jerry felt discomfort and hid better behind the group while Zio, Furs, Sasha, and Opera tensed up. While on their side, Adrian, Marich, and Sarin managed to hide their reaction much better, but a little discomfort still showed. A small pressure emanated from the man that was almost imperceptible but could still be felt, a force that squeezed the minds of those present wishing to open them to new doors of knowledge. A sharp smile formed on the red-haired man's face as he looked at the bald man in front of him. Wasting no time, The red-haired man gave an elegant bow as he placed his hand over his beating heart. It is an honor to be in your presence. Princess, remember the words of that old man. Keep your mouth shut, Flora stressed earnestly. You don't need to tell me, Miss Worm. The redhead thought as he maintained his stance, which was quickly copied by the rest of his team. Adrian had no doubt the man in front of them was a demigod. So, swallowing his desire to provoke the lamp head, Adrian showed his respect. He was now something that could hardly be called a guest. It was better to avoid insulting the agency that was covering his ass. The man in front of them nodded calmly, and while his eyes were watching everyone present, Adrian could feel them watching him in particular. I am the Archbishop in charge of the Holy Temple. My name is Thaddeus von Hohenberg. The demigod introduced himself calmly, his eyes closing before opening again. His expression hardened slightly. In an instant, the man's black eyes turned golden, and the pupil sharpened like that of a reptile. Mr. Kenway, we have honored our side of the bargain. It is time for you to honor yours and reveal the information you claim to possess about the Aurora Order. The pressure was further increased, and before Adrian could react, tentacles of shadows shot out of his own shadow and wrapped around his legs and arms, forcing him to his knees. Adrian's expression remained calm, and his face never expressed any emotion other than pure calm. Curious, the red-haired man rolled his eyes as best he could and watched as his team stood frozen in place, their eyes clouded and their expressions numb. Hypnosis, huh, nice trick, Adrian complimented, amused, before tentacles of shadows wrapped around his head and forced him to look straight ahead. Thaddeus had moved and was now standing in front of him, his golden reptilian eyes regarding him with cold calculation. Ads by PubFuture. I recommend you speak quickly, Mr. Kenway. We have had enough patience with you, and you continue to provoke us. If the information isn't as good as you promised, what will you do? Kill me? Adrian cut the demigod off with a small smile, his eyes glinting knowingly. The demigod's brow furrowed, and his eyes glowed brighter. Adrian, you better know what you're doing, Flora whispered, causing the redhead's grin to grow wider and reveal his teeth. If you were allowed to kill me, you would have done it already. Let me guess, the man upstairs told you that you can't. Tell me, what can your beady eyes see in my mind? You know what, you better not say it. I already know exactly what you're seeing. Quote. Thaddeus said nothing. His sharp golden eyes returned to their normal appearance, but his frown remained furrowed. You can't see anything, right? I imagine it must be frustrating. Adrian laughed in amusement, but the Archbishop just stared at him. You're running out of time, Mr. Kenway. Ignoring the man's provocation, the demigod just stared coldly at the man beneath him. Rolling his eyes, the red-haired man let out an exasperated sigh. I was getting to that. Geez, you guys never let people enjoy themselves in peace. Spoil sport. Laughing some more at the end, Adrian looked at Thaddeus in the eyes. His scarlet eyes glowed as a sharp grin grew on his face. The Aurora Order managed to create a vessel for the descent of the true creator using the tragedy in Backland. Right now, that vessel is roaming the world freely without anyone knowing about it. Every sound in the room died, and for the first time since the redhead saw him, the Archbishop's expression broke, and he looked incredulously at the red-haired man beneath him. What? Thaddeus cried out dumbfounded, his hands shaking with terror. What the fuck, Adrian? How do you know that? This is a joke, right? Right, Flora screamed, equally terrified as the man in front of them. The vessel of an evil god walked the earth. Foo. A dark chuckle came from deep inside the red-haired man, who looked at the terrified demigod in front of him in satisfaction. What do you think, Mr. Thaddeus? Does this information satisfy you? Adrian slithered each word like a snake as he tilted his head slightly. Thaddeus paled and stepped back unconsciously. Before he could say or do anything, a sudden glow from his desk snapped him out of his shock. Walking quickly over to it, the man opened the letter that appeared and read it. A shaky sigh escaped his lips, and the man lowered the letter with trembling hands. Suddenly, the shadows that enveloped Adrian disappeared, and he was able to stand back calmly. Arg, what happened? Charlotte's groan sounded behind him, followed by the rest of the team. Nothing, I just kept my word with Mr. Thaddeus. Am I right? Adrian asked with a sweet smile to the demigod who looked a little dazed. After a few seconds, the Archbishop nodded tensely, and the letter in his hands flew with an invisible wind to Adrian, who took it gladly. The Church of the God of Wisdom and Knowledge officially welcomes you to Lindbergh, Mr. Kenway, Thaddeus said with a slight bow. Thank you for the warm welcome, Adrian said without looking at the demigod as he read the letter in his hands with a small smile. Oh, this is certainly interesting, closing it and tucking it into a pocket of his black jacket. The conspirator winked at the demigod as he turned and walked towards the door to the stunned eyes of those present. Stopping at the door, he turned and smiled mischievously. I hope the next time we meet, it will be over a cup of coffee and chocolate cookies. This welcome was somewhat regrettable. The corners of the archbishop's lips twitched almost imperceptibly, and he could only give a slight nod. I will bear that in mind. Have a good stay. Smiling sharply at the demigod sharply, Adrian opened the door and exited, being followed closely by the rest of his team who still didn't understand what had happened. After walking far enough away from the office, the red-haired man heard a tired and resigned sigh inside him. Princess, you're out of your mind. As soon as they crossed the corner of the corridor, the first to speak was Opera, who looked somewhat startled at the rest. What was that? The planter whispered, screaming, does anyone know what happened back there? No, but it looks like the captain managed to control the situation. And judging by his smile, it looks like we came out all right. Sasha comforted the still frightened Opera, who could only nod nervously. The boss always has a trick up his sleeve. Whatever he did, it had to be very effective to make an archbishop react like that, Charlotte added. Grabbing her friend's shoulder, Furs brought her lips to the shorter one's ear and whispered, did you see anything of what happened? That lord went from all-powerful to a scary old man from one second to the next. Groaning at the whisper that was more shout than anything else, Zio turned her friend's face away, somewhat annoyed. I didn't see anything. Whatever Mr. Kenway did was hidden by Lord Thaddeus. Furs felt a shiver run up her spine, and she could only look somewhat fearfully at the man's back in front of her. Mr. Adrian, everything was taken care of. The calm voice of the Gothic Sharon cut through the mood, and the rest of the team waited for the leader's response. Sharon's blue eyes looked at the red-haired man, who turned around and gave a mischievous smile. The man waved the letter in his left hand. Oh, you have no idea how well everything went, Miss Casper. I'll bring you all up to date as soon as we get to the room. Turning around, Adrian hurried his pace, quickly followed by the rest. A confused Wraith looked at the man with a slightly raised eyebrow. Who was Casper supposed to be? Falling slightly behind, a nervous and slightly embarrassed Serena bent down slightly and whispered. Did you understand anything they said? Jerry, also slightly embarrassed, could only shake her head. No. After climbing another spiral staircase and passing through several rooms, Adrian finally stopped in front of an orange door. Opening the envelope, he pulled out a simple key and placed it in the lock. The door opened with a click, and the red-haired man entered with a smile that grew as he looked inside. A long living room greeted him. To one side were multiple wine-colored sofas and a bookshelf full of books. In front of the couches was a small table with a vase of various flowers, other small books, and pens to jot down notes. A few unlit lamps on the walls did not need to be switched on, as the sunlight coming through the window more than illuminated the whole room, giving it a warm and peaceful atmosphere. Wasting no time, Adrian walked over to the long couch and sat down with a contented and satisfied sigh. Ah, I needed this. Quote. The group just stared silently at their leader, who didn't even take a second to get comfortable. Not wanting to be left behind as a fish, Furs moved and quickly grabbed another couch and sank into it. Wow, they're really comfortable. The writer thought, already getting sleepy and wanting to take a little nap. Rolling her eyes, Zio moved over as well and sat down next to her friend while poking her arm to keep her from falling asleep. The rest of them soon followed suit and sat down on the couch. Next to him, Adrian now had a quiet but curious Jerry leaning on his shoulder, and next to him, a confused Serena. Charlotte also found his place on the couch a little further away. Sasha and Opera were on the same couch, but to the giantess, Bitterness, she had to get up as her weight almost broke it. It's not fair, the pugilist complained sadly, and Opera could only give her an apologetic look. Well, Mr. Adrian, I think this is a good time to tell us why we came here. The Wraith asked, gaining the attention of those present. Sharon was now sitting on one of the couches in an elegant pose. Marich stood behind her like a bodyguard. Smiling at the ghostly woman, the red-haired man nodded and opened the envelope, pulling the letter from it. Ads by PubFuture. What we came here to do is obvious. Make more money and get them, he said, pointing to everyone except himself, Sharon, and Marich. Up to date with their sequences. I want everyone to be at least sequence 7 by the end of the year. At his words, Marich snorted. By the end of the year, it'll be easier for the pigs to fly. Ignoring her companion, Sharon raised a delicate eyebrow. Mr. Adrian, what you propose is somewhat difficult. Waving his hand in a, doesn't matter, manner, the red-haired man smiled at the group in front of him. Sure, that would be in normal situations. But I have a way to speed up their promotion. Oh, you plan on telling them that? Sure, my team already knows about the method, but Miss Growing Pains, the writer, Jerry, Opera, and Serena haven't since they just joined. At least it looks like you guys are in the loop. He asked, not asked in a bored manner, the answer being obvious. Sharon said nothing more, she just gave a slight nod and closed her eyes. Her body remained extremely still, and the only thing that signaled her life was the rise and fall of her chest. They weren't exaggerating when they said Miss Casper looked like a doll. It's as if I was standing in front of a hyper-realistic sculpture of a person. Shaking his head, Adrian looked at the confused Jerry and Serena with a small smile. Clap. Adrian stood up from the couch and turned around, clapping his hands together calmly. Looking at the newest duo on his team, he began. Okay, Jerry and Serena, I'm going to explain to you how to enter cogitation. It is a method of calming the mind and spirit. This will accompany you all your life, and you will use it constantly in this world you are about to enter. As you may already know, there is a world hidden from normal people. This world is full of people like me, with mysterious powers and abilities beyond what a human can do. To give an example, Adrian formed an eagle of orange flames that rested on his shoulder. While the duo had already seen his abilities and control over fire, both could not help but marvel at the scene before them. This world is far darker and more dangerous than you can imagine. Madness and threats will always be behind you. Death is much closer, as it will be embracing you and whispering things in your ear. Looking at the duo, the red-haired man spoke seriously. You have already had your encounters with this world, so there is no need for me to explain the danger of it, just take my words as a reminder. Yes, sir. Both women nodded seriously. The red-haired man only looked at them for a few seconds before nodding. With a thought, the fire eagle vanished from his shoulder. These powers come from potions. Anyone who takes the potions will automatically become a Beander. Someone who has begun to abandon being human. The potions are divided into 9T01 sequences. You start in sequence 9 and work your way up the steps. The potions are divided into 22 pathways. Contrary to popular belief, these potions can be exchanged in sequence 4 for the adjacent pathway with very few exceptions. What? You can swap path them? Pausing his explication for a moment, Adrian turned around with a flat expression and a raised eyebrow. Zio gave him a nervous smile even though she was clearly shocked by what he said. She was able to control herself better, unlike Furs, who the arbiter was shushing with her hands over her mouth. Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Kenway, please continue. The writer tried to squirm, but the grip on her was iron and would not budge a single step in the face of her attempts. They're so gay I don't even know what to think. Kiss each other already, Flora commented nonchalantly, and Adrian had to make a tyrannical effort not to burst out laughing. As I was saying, he continued, the corners of his lips twitching, the potions will put you on one of these 22 paths once the decision is made. Your enemies and allies will already be decided as well. This time, the red-haired man focused on Jerry. In your case, the decision has already been made for you. You noticed, didn't you, how you were different from other kids your age and even adults? How could you see things that others couldn't? When are they lying to you or telling the truth? You were born a half spectator, so that's the pathway you'll have to follow. At least until sequence 4, if you want to change it with one of the adjacent ones. Adrian paused his explanation so he could let the youngest of the group process the information he had just said. Ads by PubFuture. She was already born a half Beander. Zio found herself surprised by this and couldn't help but look at the little girl with empathy and understanding. She knew how hard it was to be born one. She was born a half arbiter. Luckily, the furthest she got was breaking the arm of one of her schoolmates. Jerry lowered her head slightly, her brow furrowed and her mind complicated. All the questions she had about why she was always so different had just been answered, but unlike what she had expected. She didn't feel better or more complete. She just had a lot more doubts. So, in a weak, high, fearful voice, she asked. My father passed this on to me. Adrian shook his head softly. No, your father was a normal person. Your mother must have been the one who passed on the characteristics to you. A weight Jerry was unaware of was lifted from her chest and the little girl couldn't help but let out a big sigh of relief. That's good. Excuse me, Mr. Kenway. With a raised hand, Serena caught his attention somewhat nervously. Yes, Serena, do you have any questions? Adrian asked with a sweet smile, evoking the image of a preschool teacher teaching the multiplication table to the little ones. A small blush formed on the cheeks of the woman, who lowered her gaze slightly but still asked her question through shyness. You mentioned something about characteristics. Could you explain what that is, please? Oh, you're more attentive than I thought. You won't be as hard to sharpen as I expected. The smile on his face grew a little, and Adrian gave a nod. Sure, I was just about to do that, Serena. But good job for noticing, you deserve a star. The redhead laughed softly in amusement, and the blush on Serena's face grew even bigger. Thank you, the woman murmured. You would have had a future as a primary school teacher. You have a way with children like a good princess, Flora commented. Ignoring his apple worm, Adrian began. The characteristics are the potion without the supplementary ingredients that either 1, a Beander leaves when they die, or 2, one of the parents has a child to bring out the extra traits they have. Of course, a Beander in low and medium sequences can't control whether their child inherits them or not. Only by starting in sequence 4 can they control that. It's not to defend your mother or anything. It's just to avoid jumping to conclusions. Adrian finished calmly as he watched Jerry only nod weakly, a confused and complicated expression gracing the young face. Zio on her side, immediately understood what that meant. Her face paled, and her brow furrowed slightly in disgust to Fur's confusion. The red-haired man waited a few seconds before continuing his lecture. Finally, getting into the 3 Beander laws. Who didn't understand what he meant by characteristics? Now Shirley did. Opera almost fainted when she understood, while Serena and Jerry almost vomited at the implication of cannibalism. Adrian, for his part, smiled darkly inside. He was absolutely certain they were being watched right now. He couldn't see or feel them, but they were surely using some kind of ability to watch him. And he wasn't the only one who thought so, as he could see how Marich was slightly tense and Sasha and Charlotte looked a little nervous. Sharon was as composed as ever, but Adrian knew that she shared his thoughts. And Adrian planned to make the most of it. Observe all you want, look at our knowledge and bathe in it. Use those arrogant minds and imagine. If we can share this knowledge without caring who might be listening, what else do we know we're hiding? Let that curiosity itch, let it sting until you can't stand it anymore. And when that happens, I'll gladly lend a hand. Half an hour passed since Adrian finished his little course on the Beander laws. The more novice students were still somewhat stunned by such an obscure truth and had only their heads down. Considering that enough time had passed, the red-haired man rose from the couch and stood in front of the group again. To end this little lightning class, I want to share with you the method I spoke about earlier. But before I say it, I would like to remind you of something you need to engrave in your soul. In this world, nothing is free. Any gift given will always come with a price that you have to pay sooner or later. The tone in which he spoke suddenly darkened, causing his students to shiver. Glancing at the quintet that was paying more attention to him, Adrian simply gave a slight nod. Serena, Opera, Zio, Furs, and Jerry moved slightly closer to the edge of their seats, eager to know the secret that would quickly get them through the sequences. With a smile on his face, Adrian summoned some strings and pulled Charlotte to the front before the younger man could react. The redhead patted his back and sat down on the couch. I signed a contract, so I can't say anything, but my good mate Charlotte will gladly explain everything. Quote. Those present just gave a nervous glance at the man who just leaned back on the couch and closed his eyes. That guy's got something wrong with his head, I swear. Furs whispered, somewhat stunned by this sudden change, and the rookies could only nod in agreement. On the other hand, Charlotte looked at his boss exasperated and could only sigh to express his annoyance. Shaking his head in resignation, he began to discuss the acting method and how to use it correctly. As the Malay scholar explained the basics of it, the red-haired man's mind was going over everything he wanted to accomplish in Lindbergh. Lindbergh is the city of knowledge. As long as you are smart, you will have a good life here. And if you have a good idea for a company, this is one of the best places for it to thrive. The best was Backland, but with what happened, this city just got a raise. The red-haired man thought calmly. If I want to stand a chance in the future, I need not only more money but I need resources, and lots of them. Weapons, a steady supply of ammunition and food, materials. Even if I had unlimited money, without a supplier, that money would be just another decoration. Multiple companies that will focus on food production as well as weapons and ammunition production. I need to create a monopoly so that I will be the biggest winner when that war breaks out. In a year, a world war will sweep the nations and bring not only death and destruction but also great ammunition. Audrian planned to use that war not only to digest his future potions but also to create his own economic empire. History has proven this time and time again. Whether it be in my world or in this one, there is no time when human beings thrive more than when they are trying to kill each other. He would use the tears and despair that such a war would cause for his own gain. The skeletons and flesh of the lives lost would be the perfect soil for his empire to be born and thrive. This time, he would not be the masked hero who rescues people from evil gangs. This time, Audrian planned to lay the groundwork for becoming the merchant of war. With the potion already digested, he could focus all his attention and effort on it while trying to obtain the formula for Reaper. The strongest hunter, Anderson Hood, left this church after being too dumb for their levels. If he got his formula here, nothing says I can't get it, the red-haired man thought as his eyes widened and a sideways smile grew on his face. And if they did have it, I doubt it would be difficult to obtain it. He was discreet, but agreeing to receive me here before giving them the information about the wrapper means that the church is willing to invest in me. After all, between the three-flavored soup who hates him and is an ally, with the wrapper in his eyes and the complicated Miss Easy, the best choice to invest from the bearded lizard would be me. Letting out a small chuckle, Audrian opened the letter. Ads by PubFuture. Besides, with a letter like this, how can I not be happy? The information you provided proved to be much more than we originally expected. The church is willing to hide you in Lindbergh and grant you and your companions new identities and residences. These will be delivered to you within an hour of receipt of this letter in the 3D room on the floor above the one you are currently in. As a bonus to the information, we will give you the following items. 2 Grade 2 sealed artifacts of your choice and 2 of the formulas that the church has of your choice. After receiving the items mentioned in this letter, a quest will be given to you as a test. If you successfully complete it, you will be welcomed as an official member of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. If you fail, we will simply stop protecting you, and the artifacts will be recovered. The church expects much from you, Mr. Kenway, do not disappoint us. Sincerely, Pope Engelbert Sanctus. Less than greater than. Foo-foo, this certainly is interesting, Audrian whispered in amusement as his eyes sparkled. The payment is so low despite me revealing to you the existence of the divine vessel of the wrapper. This long-winded wench has no shame. He honestly expected a little more, the information he revealed was worth at least a grade 1 artifact. But I can't be disappointed, 2 grade 2 artifacts aren't bad at all. If he was lucky, perhaps he could request one made from a Reaper's characteristics. That way, he could save one formula and get another one he might need. But considering his luck, he wasn't getting his hopes up. In any case, the artifacts may be from one of the paths of my team. I hope there are some from the Spectator or Hanged Man, as those paths are very tightly controlled. From the Mystery Prior would also be useful. Shaking his head, Audrian laughed again, pleased with himself. Oh dear Lindbergh, I'll get as much juice out of you as I can before I leave. Closing the letter, the red-haired man smiled extremely pleased and settled himself better on the couch to await the mission the church had for him. Another half-hour passed, and as the letter had written, a soft knock-knock sounded at exactly 3:40 p.m. Without anyone going to invite her inside, the person behind the door invited himself in and entered with a bored face. She was a slightly older woman wearing a simple white robe with the symbol of the church on her chest and the hood covering her gray hair. She carried a tray with 2 piles of sheets in her hands, one lower than the other. Ads by PubFuture. Please fill in the document with the name you want. Once that is done, ring the bell, and I will return. The woman said, setting the tray down on the middle table and leaving the room as quickly as she entered. Again, what greeters you are with visitors, Audrian rolled his eyes as he stood up and grabbed one from the smaller stack. Giving it a quick swipe, he nodded to himself. Grabbing the rest, he passed them to Charlotte and Marich. Then he grabbed the documents from the large pile and, with a quick glance, handed them to their respective owners, except for Jerry and Serena, whose documents he gave to Opera to complete. Remember, confirm that the document describes you. You only need to add the name you will be using during your stay here, nothing more, nothing less. Adrian said seriously as he checked his document for the 5th time. A recent arrival from Fasak, with teaching degrees in languages and their history. Born on the 19th of February 1326, unmarried and without any children. A simple but complete profile. Considering that the church created it, it is obvious that it will be very complicated to verify or discover that something is wrong with it. Looking at the place where his new name would be for the next few months, he would be in Limburg. A certain smile formed on his face that caused a certain arbiter and writer to shudder. That madman is up to something. Furs thought, narrowing her eyes in great distrust of the man. Everything he shoveled in one way or another ended up with her in ridiculously dangerous situations. She would never forget when she had to run from the churches cutting through the streets. Whatever he has in mind, it can't be good. Zio thought suspiciously of the redhead. Letting out a soft chuckle, Adrian wrote the name down with a big smile. The goal he planned to achieve was by far something cold and lacking in morals, and how he planned to achieve it was something he would hide with great charisma. He would be an entrepreneur who would hide his true intentions with good deeds and a captivating smile. An entrepreneur who, in the future, would become detestable and despicable because of how he used people's pain to become richer and more powerful. A two-faced entrepreneur who would have no shame in stepping on skulls to climb the ladder. With that kind of character in mind, the name he had to use was a no-brainer. So, grabbing one of the multiple fountain pens that came on the tray, Adrian wrote his new name and identity in black ink. I wonder how Klein will react to learning that there is someone by that name. Will he be suspicious? Foo-foo, I can't wait to see it, the red-haired man thought, highly pleased as he lowered the fountain pen. Honestly, he had no idea where he was right now. With what happened in Backland, Adrian doubted that Klein had ended up going there. It was more than certain that the clown was somewhere else, but the question was where. Cupping his chin, the redhead thought for several moments before letting out a hollow chuckle. His expression was somewhat vacant. The possibility of him being in Limburg as well is not low at all. I could even say it's quite high. Considering all the shit that happened in Tingen, it wouldn't be at all strange for him to go somewhere where the Church of Evernight has no control. Looking out the window at the sun that was already close to setting on the horizon, Adrian smiled curiously. I wonder how long it will take him to discover that I don't belong to this world either. The fact that they both had Sephiras made their meeting not a matter of if but a matter of when, for they were both bound by destiny and the attraction would make them meet sooner or later. Leaving that aside, he looked over the last document with serious eyes. This document, set aside, was the one that had the information about the artifacts and formulas available. The document was quite long, much longer than the red-haired man expected it to be. Easily 5 pages full of exclusively Grade 2 artifacts that the church had under its control. The redhead took his time as he read each page, his brain analyzing each artifact and relating it to the abilities he knew and the paths they might belong to. Thanks to his brain, it didn't take him long to finish reading the 5 pages and separate out the artifacts that caught his attention the most. Sealed Artifact 2-30 Tear of the Dove. It is an antique silver goblet filled with a clear, tear-like liquid that tastes both extremely salty and extremely sweet. Power. Anyone who drinks all the water will fall madly in love with the first person they see. The effect will be such that they will do anything that person says. After about 2 hours, the person will have such an orgasm that they will go into cardiac arrest and die. Once the person who drank from the cup dies, the water in the cup will be filled as if it had never been drunk. Negative effect. The cup constantly tempts people nearby to drink it. If the person is very sexual, it will be almost impossible for them not to drink it. Sealed Artifact 2-65 Fainapotter's Children's Stories. A small paperback book. The cover is an old yellow color with multiple worn parts. On the cover is a drawing of a boy riding a dragon. The drawing is crude but still understandable. Power. Once the book is opened, individuals can move through the dreams of any intelligent being within a 300-meter radius. Within the dreams, they are also able to alter people's dreams to act on what they dream. The effect is only temporary, and after 3 days, any change will disappear. Negative effect. If not sealed and left too long without being read, the book will move through dreams on its own. It will alter the dreams where it pass, and people whose dreams are altered will awaken in a regressed age state, acting like children or babies. One way to heal this is to bring the mind back to normal through hypnosis. Artifact 2-48 Blood Dagger. An S-curved dagger about 30 centimeters long, Its blade is black in color and dripping with blood that never seems to end. Its handle is orange with fine slashes all over it. Power. Every time this dagger stabs something or someone, it will leave a mark on the spot. If the place is stabbed again or cut in the next 15 seconds, the damage done will be multiplied, and depending on the strength of the attack, it is even capable of cutting a sequence 5 Beander in half. The blood it releases can also be used as oil. It is highly flammable and can burn for 20 hours at high temperatures with only 10 mm of it. Negative effect. If the dripping blood is allowed to create a 6-inch puddle, the dagger will go into a frenzy and lose control. This is noticeable when the blade turns a fiery red like hot metal. Anyone touching the handle with the dagger in this state will lose all reason and enter a berserk state, killing and destroying everything in its path. The only way to stop it once that happens is to kill the person and feed their blood to the dagger. Artifact 2-58 Lullaby. An ordinary little music box. The only notable features are the strange symbols on its lid and the handle, which is silver in color rather than common gold. Power. When the music produced by this box is listened to, everything related to mysticism is increased several times. The increase is such that a simple charm of light can become a blinding bomb that can blind normal people and leave with permanent visual problems to beyonders of sequence 6. Negative effect. Its chanting will strengthen the mysticism related to it and constantly attract monsters from the spirit world. If the user is not careful and is left to chant for too long, an extremely dangerous monster may appear. Sealed Artifact 2-98 Face Changing Mask. Ads by PubFuture. A simple expressionless mask that completely covers the face of the person wearing it. No matter the size or shape, the mask will always adjust to fit the wearer perfectly. Power. Once donned, the wearer can transform into a completely different person. Not only will their appearance change, but their smell and voice will also change perfectly to match the desired person or a new one. Negative effect. Once the mask is put on and the wearer's appearance is changed, they will forget their previous appearance. If they were to remove the mask before changing back to their original appearance, their face would remain like this forever. A huge smile formed on the face of the red-haired man who softly touched the name of Artifact 2-48. His eyes shone extremely happily. Ha ha ha, here you are. Adrian was sure the described abilities of the artifact were the same as that of Reaper from Sequence 5. That artifact was almost certainly made with the same characteristics. Controlling himself, the red-haired man didn't let his emotions get the better of him, but instead turned to the last part of the document where the formulas that controlled the church were listed. Reader, student of ratiocination, detective, polymath, hunter, provoker, pyromaniac, mystery prior, melee scholar, warlock, scrolls professor, sailor, folk of rage, bard. A red eyebrow rose curiously. Why does the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom have so many mystery prior pathway formulas? It's the second most complete they have. Noting this down to see later, Adrian noticed something that made him unable to help but let out a small chuckle. They cut off the reader pathway before they hit Sequence 5. It seems that while they may be willing to give me the formula, they're not willing to give me that all-important stepping stone. It's funny though, they only have up to Sequence 7 of the Hunter's Path. Curious indeed. That aside, Adrian looked at the formulas available to him for a few moments and could only sigh in disappointment. Well, even for other churches, the amount the lizard displays are quite varied and decently complete. The redhead didn't even have to consider it. His decision on the formulas he would choose were made in the blink of an eye, so all that was left was the artifacts he would take. One is obvious. The blood dagger is a must for me to grab. So that leaves me with one free. It is somewhat unfortunate that there are no artifacts with Hanged Man's characteristics or some that can help with the Blood Moon, but you can't have everything. He would have to find another way to deal with the curse that Marich and Sharon suffered from. It wasn't a priority for now, but he had to keep an eye open. With getting the blood dagger, my suffering was completely worth it. Tap tap tap, his finger began to gently tap his knee, and his mind was torn between taking the artifact 2-30 or 2-65. Tear of the Dove, from the description of its powers and negative effects, must be an artifact made from the characteristics of a Sequence 6 Pleasure Witch. The ability to be practically a truth serum makes it very tempting to take, as surely was the owner of the characteristics in life. The way to use it only said one needed to take it, it never said it had to be willingly or knowing what it was. Adrian could easily pour the tears into a drink or food and have his victim at his complete will. But 2-65 is more important. Its abilities are the same as the Dreamswalker from Sequence 5. Not only is its ability extremely useful, functioning almost like a traveler, but the negative effects are extremely easy to control and avoid. That's not to mention how Jerry will be able to use the characteristics of that artifact in the future, and I'll only have to worry about the supplementary ingredients. Adrian taped his knee curiously, his brow slightly furrowed. Sleepless pathway. No, they're more about poetry, not chance. It can't be from the mystery prior pathway either. While the decision of which artifacts he was going to grab was already made, the red-haired man's mind couldn't help but wander back to artifact 2-58. While it wasn't an artifact he had planned on picking from the start, the artifact's abilities confused him quite a bit. Bard, no, either, their songs are more like strength bonuses, not increasing mysticism and attracting monsters. No matter how much he thought about it, 2-58 Lullaby's abilities didn't fit into any of the paths he knew. Tap tap tap, ads by PubFuture. His finger stopped tapping his knee, his eyes darkening slightly. It is an artifact of a path I do not know. It is another pathway from outside. This was the second one he had encountered and he doubted it would be the last. Another artifact that caught his attention was the Face Changer mask. With his enhanced memory, he remembered that Mr. Azek mentioned this mask in the original story. Could this be the mask he lost along with creeping hunger? Jotting that down to review another day in his mental block that was only getting bigger and bigger, the red-haired man closed the documents in his hands. Shaking his head, Adrian sighed tiredly and stood up from the couch. Have you finished filling in your new names? Yes, Captain, Sasha said holding up her document. Charlotte repeated the motion beside her. Already here, Opera nodded, 3 documents in hand. Jerry and Serena looked both proud and melancholic about the name they had chosen. Ready on this side, Mr. Kenway, Zio said, and Furs beside her nodded. His gaze moved to the cold duo, who merely nodded. With nothing more to say or do, Adrian grabbed the tray bell and shook his wrist. A sweet, tinkling sound echoed through the room. After a few seconds, the same older woman as before entered. Her gaze is always dull and disinterested. The woman walked to stand in front of the red-haired man. Have you chosen your payment yet? At the question, the redhead nodded. The formulas for Warlock and Scrolls Professor, and artifacts 2-48 and 2-65. The old woman's face did not change. She just gave a slight nod, grabbed the documents, and left the room, but not before saying she would return soon. 2 hours later. 5:40 p.m. Adjusting the arm warmer along with the white glove, Adrian let out a small sigh as he ran a hand through his black hair. Extending a hand with payment to the chauffeur, who left as soon as he received payment. The now black-haired man turned to look at the huge building behind him. Looking up, he first noticed the vibrant colors of the building. The yellow combined with the sunset light to give it a beautiful orange color, and the red tiles on the roof acted like clouds, further highlighting its beauty. It is impressive how some things can be repeated. Lindbergh's style is very similar to Baroque but has some small differences if you know where to look. It's quite a beautiful style and not as depressing as Backlund's Gothic. Letting out a slight sigh, Adrian gripped the briefcase tightly in his left hand and walked through the large doors of the building. A large hall greeted him, the dome ceiling painted with a man on horseback with blonde hair and a neat beard while carrying a spear in his right hand. There was a decent amount of movement here, several large groups of people coming and going. They were all wearing similar clothes, a mixture of colorful tunics and shirts, a sort of modern Greek garb. Adrian was wearing the same clothes. His white tunic shirt hugged his waist with a purple ribbon, and he wore a simple blue waistcoat with purple stitching depicting the symbol of the city's only religion. His trousers were soft charcoal black, and what remained the most were his combat boots. His face had changed as well. No longer was his distinctive long red hair, but now it was a deep black combed back to show his forehead. His scarlet eyes were now as black as his hair, and his features looked more masculine compared to his previous face. He had high cheekbones, a strong chin, deep and expressive eyes, and a broad forehead. He was a young man entering his mid-20s. Walking to the table in the back, Adrian smiled elegantly at the female attendant. "Excuse me, madam, I've come to collect my room keys." The woman, who couldn't have been more than 30, nodded, picked up a thick hardback book, and opened it without looking at him. Name and room number. Harvey Wayne, room 145. The woman just nodded and quickly moved her finger to the W section of the book. After a short search she found the name and room number. Confirming the data, The woman turned around in her chair and expertly grabbed the room key and held it out to the man in front of her. Her hand froze as she finally got a good look at the man. Adrian grabbed the key from the woman's hand with a flirtatious smile, making sure his fingers brushed against her skin, causing a visible chill to run through her. Before she could react, he grabbed her hand and planted a soft kiss on it. Freezing the woman, still with his lips on her hand, he opened one eye and smiled at her embarrassed face. "Thanks for the help, madam. Have a nice day." "Why you too, Mr. Wayne," the older woman said with a whisper and a blush on her cheeks. Winking, Adrian turned around and walked with a leisurely pace to his new room. "If you sleep with any woman, I swear I will rip that worm out and feed it to you," Flora said with enormous annoyance, her voice carrying great venom. "Don't worry, Miss Worm. This piece of cake is yours alone," Adrian whispered with a chuckle. "You'd better. I refuse to let my host be a street harlot. I am a lady bearing the proud name Jacob. Even you must not lower yourself to a nobody since you carry me." Monday the 20th of August, 8:15 a.m. Finishing his dishes after a hearty breakfast and setting them aside, Adrian, with his new appearance, could only let out a satisfied groan as he craned his neck. He was now only wearing simple black trousers and black socks. Stretching out a little more and letting out a satisfied pop, the black-haired man grabbed a turquoise tunic with a simple embroidered waistcoat with brass detailing. With his new clothes on and his hair combed back, Adrian left his room with a new destination in mind, the new meeting point. Walking through the streets of Lindbergh, Adrian looked around him with critical eyes. Internally he couldn't help but feel quite amazed at the difference between the city he was in and Backland. He and his team were in the capital of Lindbergh, Ashera. With fewer tall buildings but warmer colors and infrastructure, the red-haired man felt like he had stepped out of a cold winter night into a warm summer day. Lindbergh may be called the city of knowledge, but ironically, it is not correct to call it a city. For Lindbergh is a small country that became independent of Fanapotter 700 years ago. Although I can still see traces of the Fanapotter kingdom, the man thought, looking at the red-tiled roofs, a mark that was shared between Fanapotter and Fasak. Not only that, but the most widely spoken language of Lindbergh is, like its name, Lindbergh. The difference between it and Fasak is almost nil. Only a few words were pronounced and written differently, along with a rare accent. Sure, they were together for several centuries. It's obvious that there are roots that can't be pulled out no matter how hard you try. It's already part of the culture. One comparison Adrian couldn't help but make was between British and American English. The difference was small, but it was still noticeable in the speech. His new home was an apartment complex in a fairly decent area of Ashera, more precisely, an upper middle class one. All the people he saw passing by wore nice clothes with bright colors and brass accessories on their wrists or collars. "The church must expect a lot from you to place you in the Astope quarter, princess. Finding even a shared room here is a real pain." Flora remembered with annoyance, a small growl coming out of her at the thought of those days. Lifting the collar of his tunic a little higher so that it covered his mouth, Adrian moved his lips slightly. That and were also easier to control and watch. No sooner had he stepped out of his complex than he felt someone watching him. Before he could search for its source, the sensation was gone. "Peef, what did you expect? That they wouldn't keep an eye on you? Don't be delusional, princess, at least 3 teams must be watching you right now. A church like this never leaves things half done. They made an investment and plan on getting every penny back." Flora snorted with amusement. 2 grade 2 artifacts, 1 sequence 7 and 6 potion formulas, a residence for all your teammates, and new identities. That's an investment if I've seen one, princess. Plus that mission, a bit eerie, don't you think? Adrian snorted in amusement at her words and shook his head slightly. "They don't plan on making it easy for me, it seems." The church's mission was simple in words, but it hid something behind it. "I don't know what I expected, but I'm not surprised either. Who knew that the official beyonders of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom would be called the Wise Owls? I should have seen it coming." Shaking his head at the childish image of a certain princess's pet that popped into his mind, Adrian could only sigh. It may not have looked like it, but the humor of those pastel ponies was brutal. And no one's going to tell me Pinky wasn't on drugs. Putting aside the series he used to watch with his little cousin, the man just clutched the briefcase a little tighter in his left hand and continued on his way. "Whatever that mission is, as long as I can score more points with the church, it doesn't matter. Besides, I won't be alone this time. I have almost all my team with me, and I'm full of pretty powerful artifacts. A while later, after a quick walk, along with several shadows leaps, the black-haired man exited Elysian and entered Artelia. Immediately noticing the change from one district to another, his mind went through the information he had read before arriving here. Ashera is divided into 6 sectors that act as districts: Elysian, the main residential area of the city; Oldia, the oldest part of the city where you can still see houses dating back to pre-independence; Nexus, the economic and financial center of Ashera; Technium, the center of innovation and technological development; Artelia, the epicenter of cultural and artistic life; and finally Helicon, the academic and religious heart of Ashera and by far the most important sector. You can tell they planned the development of the city very well. The urban plan is beautiful, the red-haired man thought, and couldn't help but let out a small smile at the memory. It's as if the people who designed the city plans of Buenos Aires and Washington came together to create the city plan of Ashera, which, no matter how one looked at it, looked like a giant book with an eye in the middle. While the conspirator was impressed, he couldn't help but scoff at the boldness as he applauded it. After all, if you're going to brag about yourself, you might as well go big. Otherwise, you'd just be a mediocrity bragging about your decade's achievement. If there's one thing the traitorous trio share, it's that they all have at least a little bit too much extra, but considering who they served before, it's no surprise. They're all drama queens, the black-haired man thought with a flat face but with a small smile as he turned a corner and entered a new street. The grayish sign had written on it in black words in Lindbergh, Artiros. It lives up to its name as the area of art and entertainment. The black-haired man thought, looking at the huge scenery before him. Huge buildings painted in colors even more vivid than the rest of the large. Multiple shops selling art, exaggerated clothes, makeup, etc. But one stood out above the rest, for it was by far the largest on the street. Its facade, adorned with multiple murals clearly painted by hand, displays an explosion of colors that tell the stories of past works. Wide windows, lined with ornate bronze detailing, let sunlight flood the interior. At the entrance, majestic carved wooden doors invite passers-by to discover the great acts that awaited them. Still as beautiful as the last time I came, Flora spoke suddenly, her tone reminiscent of the past and sounding somewhat sad. We can come and see an act another day. I would appreciate it, thank you, princess. Don't mention it, Adrian said with a small smile. My puppy hasn't been up to so many tricks as to just make up for it with a show in the shower. An occasional outing to a place she likes is fine, plus it'll help my image as an entrepreneur, the red-haired man thought naughtily. While he was sure his little tease was pretty good, he felt it needed a little more. What's the point of being able to see a juicy cake behind the counter if you can't taste it? At least this way, the worm might enjoy something. Neither said anything more, and he continued his way silently down Artiros Street without further incident. Leaving the street to a more secluded area where a variety of stores was used by the establishments along the street. Adrian walked calmly to one of the warehouses at the far end of the street and quietly entered through the back door. His appearance was still the same as Harvey Wayne's, the only difference being that he was now wearing darker clothes. As soon as he entered the back door, his hand moved naturally across his waistcoat, and a strange black band was placed on his forearm. The shadows enveloped him, and he vanished from the scene and leapt into the basement below him. Emerging from the shadows and right behind a certain smoking blue-eyed woman, the black-haired man grinned mischievously at the people who managed to see him. Sorry I'm late. The scenery is much more enchanting than I thought. The sudden voice behind her startled the woman, who made a little jump and spun around in alarm. A movement such that it was extremely similar to a fish jumping out of the water. Ha 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 ha, aren't you a jumping little sardine? A chuckle came from his deep throat. His left hand amusedly stroked the head of the completely red-faced Furs, who looked at him ardently with courage and fear. I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't do that again, Mr. Kenway. Furs whimpered but found no strength to free herself from the man's assault, her heart almost beating out of her chest, and she was sure she almost had a heart attack. Ah, come on, Miss Furs, you have to be more alert so you don't get caught like that. What if I was an enemy? You'd be a salty grilled fish by now. Adrian rolled his shoulders uninterestedly and lifted his hand from the ruined hair of the rider, who could only press her lips together. Kenway, when will you stop teasing her? Arbiter Zio asked with a flat look, staring at the red-haired man who repeated his shoulder roll unimportantly. When it's not so funny, Adian replied nonchalantly and without looking at the short woman whose eyebrow jumped for a moment before returning to her flat expression. Ads by PubFuture. Her emerald eyes clashed with expressive, offended sapphire eyes that asked, "You're not going to defend me?" The emeralds replied, "Become strong and defend yourself." Furs held a hand to her chest at such an offense and blow. "I thought you were my friend," she whispered. Zio only continued to stare at her with a flat expression. Furs just moved to one of the free couches at such betrayal and threw herself on it. Adrian watched the whole exchange with a complicated look. That was something, Flora said, unsure of what to think. The conspirators' black eyes moved around the basement, which was not unlike the training area in Backland. The only things missing were the swords and spears in the corner. Almost all of his team was here. The older duo was next to Opera and Jerry, while as usual, the cold duo was a little out of the way, still very shy, by the looks of it. That done, he opened the briefcase on the table and pulled out multiple red poppies, red candles, and various vials and oils. Furs looked at what Adrian was doing in alarm. Contrary to usual, she couldn't stay still in her seat and was rocking back and forth. Her spirituality was whispering something to her that made her more nervous than she was comfortable with. Although with this guy that's normal. The faster I get used to it, the less gray hair I'll get. Oh, steam, give me strength. Swallowing some saliva, the writer tucked her simple hat into her hair as she quickly patted her chest in a triangle. Marich watched the same with a frown, his hand cupping his bicep and his eyes glinting in distrust. Sharon on the other hand was calm, her closed eyes and serene expression reflecting the coolness she felt. Serena and Jerry watched curiously at what he was doing. Deep and gray eyes glowing slightly in the soft flames of the lamps that lit the basement. Before an audience that was divided into curious and nervous sections, Adrian set up an altar, the same one he had used to trick his team before, only this time he added a few extra elements, like gunpowder. "I won't beat around the bush, you all already know about it." Adrian began, "I am a faithful believer and follower of the Scarlet Monarch. I worship he, and he alone. He is a just and benevolent God, not seeking to harm people but to protect them. All he wants in return is that they place their faith in him. My Lord's aim is simple, to prepare us for the apocalypse that is soon to befall this world. In order for as many people as possible to survive and overcome that disaster, we must be much more than we are now. I am not seeking to force you to believe in my Lord. I am simply acting as a shepherd. But I want you to know that if you encounter disaster or danger at any point, you can always ask my Lord for protection. Now what I'm going to show you is how to make sacrifices to my Lord and how you can ask for his help." Seeing what he was about to do, Sasha stood up, somewhat alarmed, and looked at him nervously. "Captain, I trust you with my life, you know that. But is it really a good idea to do this here? She really is a gorilla, very strong physically, but mentally as strong as a child who doesn't even know how to use the toilet." Ignoring his companion's comment, Adrian shook his head at the pugilist's words. "Have you forgotten Sasha? Every Beander, official or not, has heard my Lord's honorific name. He no longer needs to hide, so why would I bother doing it myself? Besides, what good would it do? We'll be under constant surveillance by the church, sooner or later they'll see what I'm doing. It's not like they're not watching now, either. We're on probation, remember? They can't test us without watching us first. Don't forget the church's attitude to us." Sasha's eyes widened momentarily before she nodded somewhat tensely. She couldn't help but feel nervous. Her short experience as an official Beander fell short to this. "Forgive me, Captain, it's all right, Sasha, I understand why you're nervous, but you have nothing to worry about. My Lord has already spoken to he, and they are in mutual agreement," Adrian said calmly, his voice soft and patient. His words echoed in the hearts of those present, an uncomfortable and barely bearable echo that made them unable to help but swallow. Those who were not aware of who the newest members were found themselves nervous and somewhat trigger-happy. Marich's left hand trembled slightly, and his eyes, which could barely contain their malice, turned to his companion, seeing how Sharon was still as calm and composed was the best balm the zombie could ask for. His hands stopped shaking, and his gaze lost its dark edge. Giving a weak nod, the pale man waited with the doll-like woman. "This is crazy. I wanted to believe it was a lie, another trick of his to deceive. But it was real, Kenway is the believer of a secret existence. Zio thought heavily, her hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. Letting out a soundless sigh, her hands relaxed, and her emerald eyes grew cold. Her cool gaze watched and waited for her new leader to begin. This much is acceptable, Zio thought, trying to calm down, but her beating nervous heart didn't want to cooperate. The fact that the apocalypse was real and fast approaching was terrifying. Furs was on her side, hiding behind her friend and trembling slightly. With a nervous smile on her face, the teachings of the god of steam and machinery replayed over and over in her mind, telling her how this was a horrible idea. But, if one of the Orthodox churches is willing to accept this, then it should be safe, right? Surely the Scarlet Monarch is a benevolent existence. Furs consoled herself with a crazed look and a shaky smile. Her hand gripped her friend's arm for support as she held one of the stones from her bracelet in the others. Always have an escape ready. There is no shame in running away with one's tail between one's legs to live another day. She would deal with the boosted ravings when she escapes from here if the situation goes wrong. A thought and the red candles burst into orange flames. The red-haired man watched everything with serene eyes. Adrian wasn't nervous or scared that the bearded lizard would discover that he was carrying the City of Calamities. He had already pulled out Creeping Hunger and the Burnt Band when he got to his room in the apartment building. He did that because, again, he wasn't afraid of the lizard finding out. In fact, he wanted him to. He wanted him to find out. The likelihood of you having it is not low at all. And I know you know very well what it means for me to have the Saphira, don't you? Adrian thought with a small smile on his face. You know that if I lose and the soup wins, you'll be more than dead, since you'll not only have to worry about the wrapper but also have to hide from the possible calamity of destruction. Now that the lizard knew that the wrapper could move through the physical world and was no longer trapped in the forsaken land of the gods, Adrian was sure he was nervous. Would he be attacked out of nowhere, devoured by his own shadow before he could do anything? Watch as his own flesh was consumed in the same way he consumed the flesh of his lord. I want you to be afraid of that. Be terrified of it, be horrified by the mere thought. That way, you can protect me better, for who better to protect you from your furious lord than a future calamity? With eyes glittering mischievously, Adrian clasped his hands together in prayer and spoke in ancient Hermes. The Scarlet Monarch who burns depravity, the calamity forgotten by time, the stranger that comes from the unknown, your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. No sooner was the prayer completed, and after only 3 seconds, the orange flames of the candles exploded into a blazing scarlet fire that rose up to form a doorway. Ads by PubFuture. The illusory background of the flames cleared, and in it could be seen a majestic city covered in yellowish smoke, with pure fire humanoids in rusty red armor patrolling. Above that city and sitting on a yellow cloud was a figure watching them, a small smile on his face hooded by the hood of the tunic he was wearing. Watching as the flaming door closed, the red-haired man did not return to his body but remained seated in a beach chair on the yellowed outskirts. The Scarlet Monarch's disguise was discarded as soon as the door had closed. His red hair swayed in an invisible wind, and his scarlet eyes stared earnestly at his hand. One thing he had noticed the times he changed his appearance and did not return it to normal the moment he entered the City of Calamities was that he would always have his original appearance once inside the Saphira. My appearance may change, but inside I will always be Adrian Kenway. That will never change, the red-haired man thought calmly as he turned with interest the object in his left hand. In his hands was the card of blasphemy. With a serious look, the red-haired man infused a bit of his spirituality into the card, which quickly became 3-dimensional and turned into a small pocketbook. Adrian calmly looked at the head figure of Emperor Russell and opened the book to the first page. Less than greater than. Sequence 9. Secret Supplicant. Primary ingredients. 50 milliliters of the blood of the blind goat and the ears of the white stag. Supplementary ingredients. 30 milliliters of holy water, 10 grams of pure silver, 10 olive leaves, and 20 hairs of the white stag. Sequence 8. Listener. Main ingredients. 50 grams of the honey of the red stung bee and 10 drops of the blood of the pale crow. Supplementary ingredients. 27 milliliters of holy water, 5 grams of white gold, 7 grams of copper, 4 claws of the white raven. Sequence 7. Shadow Ascetic. Main ingredients. The shadow remnants of a forsaken. Supplementary ingredients. 10 milliliters of holy water, 3 drops of the blood of a believing shepherd, 5 drops of one's own blood. Sequence 6. Rose Bishop. Sequence 5. Shepherd. Sequence 4. Black Knight. Ritual of advancement. With the souls you have graced, engage and devour an evil spirit of the level of a demigod. Sequence 3. Trinity Templar. Sequence 2. Profane Presbyter. Sequence 1. Dark Angel. Sequence 0. Hanged Man. Ritual. Orchestrate an event that plunges a continent into utter despair, shadows, and pain. Immerse yourself in the collective despair. When despair reaches its peak, consume the potion. Less than greater than. Well, at least this answers how he was able to survive when he was betrayed, and he wasn't killed. Adrian thought calmly as he looked at the Sequence 0 ritual. With his death, the land was plunged into disaster, and he himself drowned in despair. Waking up in his own corpse, the conditions were complete. Sighing, the red-haired man let the pocketbook return to its letter-like appearance and blew it back to its former place. Watching as the letter was enveloped by the yellowish smoke, a chuckle came from him. Did you really think that I wouldn't use you just because you revealed your investment in me? I really thank you though. I doubt that without that information the bearded lizard would have been so kind to me. I'll be sure to put your sacrifice to good use. Dragging out sweet words, a small chuckle left his lips, and his scarlet eyes sparkled. Though, of course, there is the possibility that he revealed himself with exactly that in mind, a part added to his heart, but it was one that Adrian would take into account just the same. If it was the case that they were both being used by each other, then fair play. His gaze moved down from where the card ended up to his left forearm, where a half-opaque flame tattoo seemed to be slowly filling in. His right arm looked normal here, unlike in the real world. At this rate, it shouldn't take more than 8 days for him to recover. Letting out a somewhat relieved sigh, the red-haired man could only shake his head. At least now I know my soldiers can't die. Shaking his head, his gaze moved around him for a moment towards the multiple small orange flames floating around the field. Floating like little fireflies on moonless nights, a few more would appear every so often. Adrian easily found the flames that represented himself, Flora, and Charlotte. The rest were people he didn't know but whose prayers still reached here, and he could hear the murmurs. There are more than yesterday. Shaking his head, he put off adjusting his answering machine for another day and began to draw the sphere of light. Reopening his eyes, Adrian looked at the objects in front of him. A big smile on his face as he stood and straightened up and gave a military salute. Praise the monarch. With his thanks to his lord done, the red-haired man turned around and looked at the nervous group behind him. In front of the altar were now 2 large vials where one floated the matured manhole-fish's eyeball while the other was filled with the red goat-horn blackfish blood. The remaining ingredients were supplementary ones. All the ingredients to concoct the spectator potion were ready. Zio never thought it possible that the sacrificial ritual could look so majestic. Of course, she had never really gotten into rituals in this world, but she had never expected it to look like that. Her heart pounded with anticipation at a conversation she had with her new leader some time ago, every word resonating as if she were living it all over again. Is this the chance to survive that Mr. Kenway mentioned? The reason he said to wait was for the Scarlet Monarch to regain his strength so he could help Furs. Zio, while she found herself ecstatic that her friend would now be safe, a part of her couldn't help but frown. Hadn't he said to wait until mid-October? So that's getting an answer from a god, Furs thought, somewhat stunned at the spectacle she had just witnessed. Her stomach heavy and her faith wavering. If the Scarlet Monarch responded to the sacrifices and what Adrian said about extending a hand in situations of danger or if we encounter a disaster. Could the Scarlet Monarch save me from the ravings of the Blood Moon? She still had what the man had told her several weeks ago etched deep in her heart and soul. One of the few ways to survive was to receive the protection of a god during the ravings. Something she had given up because no matter how hard she tried, no matter how fervently she prayed, no matter how many tears and sacrifices she offered. The god of steam and machinery never responded to her aid. But if the Scarlet Monarch could do it, your destiny is not with him. Adrian interrupted the pair's thought as he pulled something out of his pocket and began to play with it in his hands. What? The writer whispered in confusion and some fear, her mind already going through the worst-case scenario. Your destiny is not with the Scarlet Monarch. The conspirator explained himself better calmly as he tossed the object in his hands up and down. His words did not at all please a certain woman who gave him a fiery glare. Is this your way of mocking us, Kenway? Zio asked through her teeth as her fists clenched in barely contained anger. The writer found herself confused and devastated, but before she could do anything, the red-haired man threw the object in his hand, which hit her forehead with a soft thump. The thump snapped her out of her descent, and she looked up dazedly at the man in front of her, who still had his hand outstretched and a smile on his face, a smile that, contrary to what she expected, was soft. "Don't be alarmed, Miss Furs, even if your destiny is not with my lord, that will never mean that he will leave you to your fate." With a smile, the red-haired man pointed to her lap. Unconsciously, Furs looked down at the object that had struck her. With some surprise, she saw that it was a folded yellowish piece of paper. "The answer you were looking for is in that letter. Once you read it, you can kiss your problems goodbye with the blood moon." With a mysterious smile, Adrian turned away and began to clear the altar table. His voice in the air carried a silent trap whose hook was too juicy to resist. The hope that had become embers that were about to be extinguished exploded into flames that burned the emptiness in her stomach. With slightly trembling hands, Furs grabbed the folded paper and prepared to open it. Her blue eyes glittered like precious gems. Zio had moved to her side and was staring at the paper, her green eyes also glowing, but the arbiter kept her composure better thanks to her experience. As soon as the yellow paper was opened, Furs saw some words in Loan, and she began to read them aloud before thinking what they might be. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black that wields good luck." Furs's huge grin froze as her eyes lost all their sparkle, and her skin paled almost instantly to a sickly shade of white. Zio's hand went to the hilt of her sword so fast it seemed to teleport there. But before she could unsheath it, a fleeting memory struck her, and her furious expression turned to complete exasperation. "Your humor really is sickening, Mr. Kenway," the blonde said with a snarl as she dropped her sword. The woman put her hand to her head at the migraine that attacked her due to the rapid rise of her blood pressure to her brain. "I'm sorry, but I had to do it." His tone carried no hint of regret. Turning to the younger novices, Adrian continued, "Take this as a lesson, never, ever read anything out loud. That will only make people see that you are mentally retarded, and you will die faster." With a slow, pained movement, Furs' pale, horrified face turned to look at him. "Huh? What, did you forget already? The fool and the Scarlet Monarch are allied, and you are in no danger of being corrupted or harmed for saying the honorific name." Adrian explained calmly as he began to prepare the potion. "UHU. Furs muffled with a faint nod, her eyes lowered to the paper in her hands, and a horrible shudder passed down her back. Quickly folding the paper with trembling fingers, the trickmaster tucked it nervously into her robes. "I should never have come. I should have stayed home." The writer wailed with crystalline eyes, already regretting her decision greatly. Ads by PubFuture. "That was cruel, princess. Don't you have a heart?" Flora teased, somewhat amused at the stupidity she had just witnessed. Who would read a letter aloud? Adrian didn't answer. He just prepared the clean cauldron he brought in his briefcase to start preparing the potion. "Jerry, Serena, come here." Without wasting any time, the more inexperienced duo quickly complied with the call by getting off the couch and standing next to the black-haired man. Without looking at them, Adrian passed a piece of paper to Jerry. "This is the spectator's potion formula. I have the ingredients here, so let's prepare it. Have you been practicing cogitation like I told you to?" Quote. As soon as she heard that her potion would now be made, the little girl's gray eyes sparkled with excitement, but controlling herself, she nodded. "Yes, Mr. Kenway. Perfect. As soon as you take the potion, I want you to use it. The danger of losing control when consuming a sequence 9 potion may be low, but it should not be ignored." Quote. Understood. Swallowing some saliva, Jerry nodded tensely. In yesterday's classes, Mr. Kenway touched on the subject of losing control, so she knew well what that meant and the danger it would pose for the rest of her life. Adrian let out a soft sigh and turned around. On one knee, he got eye level with the little girl and grabbed her shoulders. His gaze was serious, and his eyes were cold. "I'll ask you one last time. Are you sure you want to do this? There's no turning back once you take your potion. This is the last chance you have." Jerry looked with an emotionless face into the man's black eyes. "I've never been so sure of anything. I refused to lose loved ones because I was unable to protect them." Quote. Cold black eyes met cold gray eyes. After a few seconds, Adrian nodded and stood up. He turned around and finally looked at the only normal person in the room. "Serena, I want you to take this as an example. Once your body is in better health, I will also give you your potion, but for now, you will have to stick to watching. The older woman gave a weak nod, and while the thought of waiting bothered her a little, she was confident it was for the best. I understand, Mr. Kenway. I'll do my best to fatten up. All right, Adrian commented without saying much more. Turning around and grabbing the first vial containing the 80 milliliters of pure water, Adrian looked seriously at the women. Before making a potion, we should always start with the supplementary ingredients. The main ones are best left to the end. The black-haired man took his time explaining the process of making the potion, even pausing at various times to explain any doubts Serena and Jerry expressed. After a combination of lecture and practice, the Sequence 9 Spectator potion was completed. With calm and nimble hands, Adrian poured the contents of the cauldron into a cup. Not a drop remained in the cauldron, something he made sure to mention. While it might be a sign that the potion was successfully made, one should not rely too heavily on it. The potion appeared to be a sticky silvery liquid with countless bubbles, creating a serene atmosphere as one watched them move. Extending the cup to Jerry, who took it with a serious face, the black-haired man looked at her seriously. One extra thing. Completely ignore the taste. These things are not tasty, and they don't leave a good aftertaste. Remember, if at any point you feel yourself slipping, repeat these words. Adrian then said the prayer for help to the Scarlet Monarch in Hermes and repeated it several times so Jerry would learn it. Seeing that the girl nodded, he continued. They are the honorific name of my lord. When you learn Hermes, you will be able to understand them, but it doesn't matter if you don't know it now. With all the preparations done, Adrian sighed inwardly and nodded. Whenever you are ready, Jerry. The young half-spectator returned the nod. Her eyes lowered to the cup she held in her hands, whose gray color reflected the silver of the potion. The potion appeared to be a sticky silvery liquid with countless bubbles, creating a serene atmosphere as one watched them move. Unbeknownst to anyone, Adrian entered a state of semi-cogitation. In case something went wrong and Jerry prayed, he wouldn't have to waste time drawing the sphere from scratch. While all that was going on, a better but still pale Furs looked at Zio doubtfully. Ads by PubFuture. Are you fine with this? She whispered. A golden eyebrow raised, and the arbiter looked doubtfully at her friend. What do you mean, Furs? Biting the inside of her cheek lightly, she continued. You're okay with a child drinking a potion? I thought someone like you would be more against it. A sad smile bloomed on Zio's face at such a question. She could only shake her head. I'm fine with it. It's her decision. Besides, with the apocalypse coming upon us, she better be strong so she can protect herself. That's not exactly the truth, is it? Her closeness with Zio showed, and Furs immediately noticed how she had hidden her true thoughts. Upon being caught, Zio said nothing and just watched the young girl who was about to take her first step into a horrible, dark world. As she watched as the girl looked determinedly at the potion, her figure began to change. The curly brown hair turned a beautiful black and the skin became slightly paler, the eyes turned green. That girl turned and smiled happily at her. She was gentle and full of life, and she had on her right wrist a small green bracelet. Her smile was a smile that the arbiter knew she would never see again. Her emerald eyes became moist. Zio closed her eyes and let out a faint sigh. After a few seconds, she opened them again, a huge sadness and regret in them. If she had been one, perhaps she would still be here now. If a child can become strong, then I have no problem with them doing so. That way, monsters won't be able to take them away. Furs, eyebrows raised in shock, all her doubts as to why the fair Zio agreed to this were resolved. With a sad look on her face, she placed a hand on her friend's shoulder in support. Zio didn't look at her best friend. She kept her eyes on Jerry. Unaware of Zio's thoughts, the little girl closed her eyes and raised the cup to her lips. Gulp. As Adrian had said, she ignored the taste of the potion sticking in her throat and just concentrated on consuming it all. When nothing else entered her mouth, Jerry wasted no time and quickly entered the cogitative state as she had been taught. After a few seconds, some horrible murmurs began to ring in her ears, tempting her to listen to them. But she ignored them as she was taught and focused all her attention on cogitation. A small ball of light was redrawn over and over again in her mind. Little by little, the murmurs became fainter and fainter until they disappeared as if they had never been there at all. Jerry did not come out of the cogitation but stayed in it a little longer. Her breathing calmed, and her heart was beating quietly. After another 30 seconds, she finally opened her gray eyes, which shone thanks to the lamp's light. She could immediately feel the change in herself, and more details and emotions were revealed for her to see. Her attention was not focused on the rest but remained on the proud smile of her hero, who ruffled her hair. Jerry couldn't help herself, and a big smile filled her face. "Congratulations, Miss Spectator. You are a Yearner now," Adrian said, happily watching with his spiritual vision as the girl's once soft but turbulent and slightly transparent silver aura became an ethereal silver that moved like a wave. His smile grew a little as he watched the aura intensify for a moment before taking on a slightly calmer and more serene color. Jerry also looked surprised as her eyes widened and her mouth hung down in an, "Oh. Mr. Kenway, is this feeling?" the girl asked in astonishment, and he nodded. "Looks like it's a day of celebration. Congratulations on digesting your potion." His words caused those present to stare in amazement at the little girl who had a cocky smile on her face. In East Borough, the number of homeless children made her just one of the crowd. Never drawing attention to herself and being ignored. In order to survive, she had to search and observe for any chance. She analyzed people's movements and learned their actions so she could steal better. Adrian thought calmly. In a way, she's been acting like a spectator all her life. With a smile, the black-haired man ruffled the little girl's hair. Looking up from the girl who was enjoying the pampering, Adrian looked at his team. "While we can't do anything until we complete the church assignment, that doesn't mean we can't prepare for it," he said. "First mission, find Yearner gatherings. If anyone finds a clue or sign, let the rest know by the method we talked about. We have 10 days for the mission. Until it arrives, stay out of trouble." The mission commissioned by the church would fall next week, Thursday, August 30th. Click. Glancing at the time on his new but simple pocket watch, Klein let out a soft sigh and massaged his forehead with 2 fingers to relieve the stress he was feeling in preparation for what was to come. It was currently 12:45 Ashera time. Due to the distance between this city and Tingen, the time difference was 2 hours later, so if he wanted to start the meeting at the normal time of 3 p.m., he would have to wait until 1 p.m. People here usually have lunch at 1300, so it shouldn't be a problem if the meeting is at that time. But because of my current job as a detective, it's very likely that I'll be invited to lunch at that time to talk about assignments. As had become his habit, his finger began to tape the edge of his desk. His eyes calculated. It's better if it's after 1300. An hour or 2 later should be fine, giving me more time to prepare. I would have preferred another week, as I said, but Mr. Chariot makes that impossible. This tarot club can't wait any longer. Tap 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 tap. His finger accelerated, and the clown's frown deepened. The acid from the newspaper lying in the kitchen corner deepened his frown even more. "I knew I made a deal with the devil. I just never thought it would have such consequences. Now my name is going to be on that madman's back." But what made his expression even more angry and bitter was the fact that he had been warned. Chariot himself had said that he would use his name as the fool in the existence of the tarot club to protect himself. But the extent to which he did so was something Klein could not have imagined. A long, deep sigh left the depths of his modern soul. At least the tarot club already has the protection of a true great existence. I just had to shake hands with a madman. He could never make a mistake like that again, even if the profits he promised himself could somehow make up for it. And that's not counting what he asked for in return for his contribution points. It was quite a request to make of a great being like the supposedly missing ancestor of the Antigonus family, the fool, but Chariot had the points to consider his request. From 1 second to the next, Klein's expression immediately relaxed. It was as if the man had forgotten everything and finally reached the highest peace of mind. Clank. With the full force of the clown's powers, he rose from his chair, glancing at the simple pocket watch, and made his way to the bathroom at a somewhat hurried pace. The hands of the cheap device he had bought for 2 argans and 5 coppers read 1250 p.m. In the Hall of Giants, at the musty bronze table, Klein let out a light sigh as he took his place in the seat of honor. He waited a few moments before extending his right hand to the crimson star representing the newest member so far. In a calm voice, he said, "The tarot club is about to begin, so be prepared." City of Silver, it's all right, it's all right. The meeting will start soon. The son, Derek Berg, tried to console himself as he flipped through the book in his hands for the 5th time. It was a dark brown cover, eroding words by time and use. This book was the history of his home, at least from the time the cataclysm struck, and everything was shrouded in storm and darkness. The contents of this book were the payment he would give to Mr. Chariot in exchange for taking the first step towards becoming the sun. I just hope this is enough. 290, 291, 292. Even though his mind was complicated and he feared what would come, he never stopped counting. As there was no constant way of measuring time here, Mr. Fool had the bright idea of counting heartbeats. As soon as he reached 300, a crimson glow filled his vision. Derek couldn't help himself and finally closed his eyes. When he opened them, he found himself back in the divine hall, facing the inhabitants of the world of light and the mysterious and omnipresent figure of the Lord of this gathering. We have not been abandoned. We have not been abandoned. Large, tearful words of relief echoed in his soul, and the young man heaved a sigh of relief. A part of him thought that he had offended the first god to accept a prayer after millennia by not heeding his word and keeping his mouth shut at the first meeting. Thankfully, Mr. Fool is merciful. I can't offend him like that next time. The word of a god is law. Derek thought in a cold sweat. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. The elegant lady rose from her seat and curtsied, clutching the edges of her dress. Unlike the first time he had heard her speak, Derek could tell that Justice seemed anxious. Unconsciously, the young man swallowed saliva. The nervousness in his chest receded, and he could finally feel the palpable, oppressive pressure that covered the musty table. All that pressure seemed to be directed at the silent chariot, who also greeted the occupant of the seat of honor with a slight bow. Derek's brow furrowed in concern as the greetings were barely over before Justice and the hanged man turned their attention to the last member. I've got 2 pages, Mr. Fool. Who didn't seem to mind the attention at all, keeping that friendly smile on his blurred face. You're looking too comfortable, Mr. Chariot. What are you going to do this time, you bastard? Klein stopped himself from blinking but kept his guard up. Too often, he had overestimated what the madman could get away with, and too often, he had paid the price. No more. This time, he would be ready. His skin became hard and wrinkled. He was no longer the newborn he had been before. Overestimate your enemy, underestimate your strength. Klein repeated wisely in his heart. After repeating this several times to encourage himself, he slightly nodded and said calmly, all right. As much as he wanted to address the giant pink neon elephant in the room and get the headache out of the way, it didn't fit with the persona of the fool he had created. He could only leave it for later, no matter how much he wanted to get started. I also prepared my 2 pages, Mr. Fool. Alger added his part only seconds behind, earning a simple nod from the fool. It was his pages that contained information about the mysterious transmigrator. The possibility of more among the remaining 18 is not small. A small whirl formed in his stomach, eager to learn more about this compatriot. Not expecting this gathering to be normal, Audrey stood in a daze for a few moments, not knowing what to do, recovering as best she could. She grabbed the edges of her dress and made a slight, elegant bow. Excuse me, Mr. Fool, but I won't be able to deliver a page today. Klein only nodded slightly at the apology from the only woman in the tarot club. He had already produced the fountain pens and goat parchment before the previous duo. Adrian looked calmly at the yellowish parchment in front of him. Without hesitation, he grabbed the red fountain pen and quickly wrote down the information on the pages he had left. Only one of the 2 was there, the other was written from memory. Better give him a bomb for what's to come. I don't want him to walk funny. The redhead thought as he lowered the pen to the side of the fresh page of the diary, the corners of his lips slightly raised. The last time he spoke to Klein, he had revealed the existence of Sequence 0 in advance. It was time to secure the leader's mind with the most reliable database, oldshame.net.com, in the hands of the beloved Huang Dao. With everything I've already told him, I wouldn't be surprised if he already discovered the name Sequence 0 from his path. He even expected it. The man was smart after all. Sighing inwardly, Adrian calmly called with a hint of milk and honey in his voice, I'm done, Mr. Fool. This one's up to something. Klein frowned inwardly as he nodded to both men's words, his inner shield held high and pointed at Chariot. The pages disappeared in front of both of them and reappeared in front of the clown. Keeping his instincts open, he prepared to control his body to suppress any reaction that might occur. Klein decided to remove the bandage from one and start with Chariot's page. January 1st, the beginning of a new year. I happen to have finished my first card of blasphemy. I will hide the ultimate secret of the 22 paths of the divine in these various cards of blasphemy and scatter them throughout the world. If all else fails, they'll be the best insurance my children can fall back on. Haha, I'll disrupt the order they want and spread the deep mysteries of the divine. These cards of blasphemy will have the properties of being anti-divination and anti-prophecy. Apart from those I'll give to my children, those who are destined to receive them will do so. I am a person who makes sure that accounts are settled when it comes to grudges, and after I die, who cares if floods deluge the heavens? Oh, I didn't write that sentence. This old organization is my last and greatest insurance. I don't know if they will support me, or how they will support me. I still remember the shock when I saw the blasphemy slate for the first time. So it turns out that the paths of the beyond are paths of the divine. It is true that the blasphemy slate blasphemes the gods. Above the sequence 1 of each path, there is a sequence 0. And there's a corresponding potion and ritual. Every path has a sequence 0. And sequence 0 is the sequence of a true god. For example, sequence 0, sun. This is. Inwardly blinking, Klein took a moment to savor this page as he jotted down the information on the blasphemy card for later review. So the blasphemy cards not only hide the secret of sequence 0, but possibly all the formulas as well. Kane mentally cupped his chin, his gaze deep and his body strangely still. Ads by PubFuture. A set of 22 cards, each hiding a complete sequence. This must be one of the most coveted treasures in the world. Was this his legendary treasure? His one piece? Holding back his trembling excitement, Klein relaxed his body and sighed inwardly. Although he was somewhat stunned, he wasn't as surprised as he thought he should be. If this had happened 5 days ago, it would undoubtedly have been a different case. He would have been shocked and disbelieving at this revelation. But because of a certain lunatic, that wasn't the case. The bandage was torn off with the arm. At least this confirms the information revealed by Mr. Chariot. The true level of a god, sequence 0. When he had finished tasting this dish, Klein turned to the man's second page. The 3rd of March. Last night I drank too much and woke up in my bathroom with a parrot and a raccoon in the bathtub. I have no idea where they came from. Single quote. Single quote. The information difference between this page and the previous one wasn't even funny anymore, it was disappointing and pathetic. Only a few seconds were spent reading it, a few seconds he wished he had back. Klein turned to the pages the hanged man had handed him. August 2nd. This goes deeper than I thought. History is certainly something that can be easily manipulated. August 5th. I witnessed the abilities of a high-sequence Beander today. It was truly frightening. There was a qualitative change that happened to them in one particular aspect, it was as if they'd transformed into a deity. It's no wonder that we call them demigods. The 6th of August. There's something strange going on. Why would the 7 great churches have such a strange attitude towards the potions? The 9th of August. The events of the past 2 days have made me uncomfortable. I started the Industrial Revolution with my own hands and personally ushered in the age of steam and machinery, but this will create the conditions necessary for the evil god to descend upon this world. History is an easy thing to manipulate, Repeating the emperor's words, Klein knew and felt that simple sentences dark and evil truth. He only had to look at his home as an example before he transmigrated. If it were so easy to manipulate history there, what would it be like in this world of gods, angels, and demigods? How much history would be buried in their lies and manipulations? Qualitative change, Klein thought, his memory recalling his encounter with the sword of the goddess Krestek Sesimir, the baby in Megos's womb, and the true appearance of Mr. Chariot. The mere presence of these beings was oppressive and suffocating, and the fact that death was certain if one saw their true appearance made Klein shudder as he remembered his experience with the golden blood. To find his way home, it was obvious that he would have to continue climbing the sequences. But how far was he willing to go? Giving up my humanity to return home. Can I really do that? He couldn't help but feel some fear and anxiety at such a thought. His hands wanted to shake, but he held them back. For a few long seconds, his eyes did not leave the page. He read it several times, noticing different details in each symbol. Though much had been lost in the process of transcription and recopying, Klein could still see the small traces of great emotion that permeated each symbol. Emperor Rassel's clear desire for the great power he called divine could still be seen. Perhaps I would be as excited as he was, if I didn't know what I know. To gain this power, demigods give up a part of their humanity to transcend it. A soft sigh sounded inside him, and Klein lowered the pages that had barely left his hands and vanished as if they had never existed. He rested his cheek on his knuckles and looked serenely ahead. Now is not the time to hesitate, there is no turning back. I'm going home, no matter what, the clown thought determinedly as his eyes fell on the farthest member of the table. Seeing that the fool had finished his reading, Justice and Hanged Man made the same move, turning their gaze to the black-robed figure. Feeling the stares, Adrian leaned back on his elbow and rested his cheek in the palm of his hand. His eyes were bright and an innocent smile was on his face. Let the show begin, the redhead thought as he licked his lips. His tongue was already out, dripping with venom.